Chapter 11. Pintoc. While in his 20s, Pintoc was called by the people to be the watchman. His recommendation, made by the serving watchman, had been written in a sealed letter. At the sudden death of his incumbent, the letter was opened and read at the next morn song. In addition, the herald of the city was required to read the letter at every hour of the day in the marketplaces and squares of the city. After meditation on the word of the king, and considering the needs of the people, I, Watchman Benjamin Jerkison, believe and confess that, in the matter of the succession of the watchmen upon the occasion of my death, the will of the king is that Pintoc Packerson be called, ordained, and installed as watchman of and in the city. The people gathered at the first evensong after my departure from this vale of tears are asked to affirm this recommendation and hear Watchman Pintoc at this tower. In the name of the king, Watchman Benjamin. Word spread throughout the city, and a large crowd gathered at the tower for evensong. The followers of the king affirmed Watchman Pintoc as both the curious and the critical, the faithful and the fallen, observed and listened. On a still desert night, with the ox of the wind lowing quietly, Watchman Pintoc ascended to the cupola and began his watch. His first look was a lengthy gaze to the southeast, in the direction where his old grandfather lived. Turning to the left, he stared at the awful dune, noting the dusty-colored sand's reflection of the light from a blue moon. Finally, he peered to the ground immediately to the north of the tower, thinking on his wife and imagining what her perspective might be. Watchman Pintoc had a keen eye and a gifted mind, enabling him to direct the people on the narrow path between the Eutychian merchants and the Nestorian peddlers. He prevented a horrible infestation when he spotted a syncretistic army on the horizon. His accurate analysis of the situation provided sufficient time to educate and equip the people on its subtleties. When deadly unionism ran through the ranks of jerkers and jerkees, and threatened to lay waste the followers of the king, Watchman Pintoc guided the congregation to keep the plague at bay. Individuals also found a listening ear and an understanding spirit when they brought their problems to Watchman Pintoc. He helped children solve absolutely major, colossal problems with friends, as well as suggest a small corrective adjustment for a few small, minor, really insignificant predicaments that many husbands have with their wives. His unique ability to present accurately the various perspectives in a dispute, whether in a marriage, family, or neighborly situation, helped diffuse and resolve many quarrels. When he did make mistakes, he learned from them and became a wiser man. Soon a saying began to circulate among the people, from both those who confessed the king and many who denied him, about Watchman Pintoc. He has a heart with ears. Shortly after his affirmation, Watchman Pintoc began observing the dune. He kept a journal noting the conditions preceding a sandslide, and thought about the possibility of predicting them. Charts were made comparing direction and strength of the wind, and tables were made concerning height and inclination of the slope, temperature, and time of slide occurrence, as well as digging activities which might hasten such occurrences. In the end, he concluded there were too many variables and probably several unknowns preventing him from making even a semi-educated guess. As it turned out, Watchman Pintoc determined that basic Yankee intuition was a more accurate predictor. He believed from the Yankee point of view, the Yankee had a greater investment in the sand slide than he did. It was during his nighttime measurements and observations of the dune that Watchman Pintoc first saw glimpses of a small figure darting from cover to cover. Rumors purporting the existence of a mysterious creature slinking around the city during the darkest nights had been part of the local gossip for decades. Reported sightings of the shadow child occurred once or twice a year. Descriptions of the small personage were sketchy. Speculations were abundant, ranging from a little boy locked up in a hut during the day and freed for a while at night, to the incarnation of a fallen angel, to the king, to a large black cat that had the ability to run on its hind legs. Opinions on the consequences of catching the shadow child went to even greater extremes. Some believed it would result in some great good, like the granting of a wish, the return of a man's potency, or an artesian well miraculously appearing at the spot where the capture occurred. Others convinced themselves of some horrid evil afflicting the trapper. He would lose a third of his remaining lung capacity each year, develop incurable hiccups along with a severe hiatal hernia, or simply not be able to die. Such speculations led to the saying, "Snaring the shadow child is like getting married, and remembering that with the bride you also get a mother-in-law." While many people guffawed at this saying, some men didn't see the humor in it. When this was said around them, the wedding day diggers had even more to make them nervous. Watchman Pintoc's observations and notes were much more helpful in predicting the appearances and movements of the shadow child than the occurrences of the dunes slides. Within a year, he knew that the shadow child came out every other night except during a period of 3 days before and 3 days after the full moon. Though the watchman could never determine where the shadow child either began or ended his jaunts, he knew the little creature appeared within the hour after midnight. Invariably, the shadow child slipped down a dark alley between 2 rows of huts. Where the shadow creature went and stopped, if indeed a stop was made, remained unknown. Less than 5 minutes later, the shadow child reappeared to the east, now carrying a small bundle, quickly vanishing into the shadows of the city. Although he listened carefully, the watchman never heard any reports of items being stolen. Pintoc kept all this to himself and didn't seek to engage the shadow child. He did, however, decide to take a closer look. On a bright night at the end of the 6-day period when the shadow child did not appear, Watchman Pintoc gave a thorough check of the desert and left the tower a few minutes before midnight. He moved quickly through the streets and hid himself along the route taken by the shadow child. Though Watchman Pintoc thought he heard someone shortly after midnight, he saw no one. Despite the watchman's hour-long vigil, the small creature did not pass by, or at least the watchman did not believe he passed by that night. Pintoc was never entirely certain. Watchman Pintoc tried to imagine himself as the shadow child. He decided he'd make no further attempts to get close to the little creature. Instead, he would watch from the tower and record some notations for the next few years. Chapter 12, Plight. Archibald made his measurements for the apparatus. Plight was put into it, and the process began. It was wicked beyond belief. The evil within the mind that conjured such a wretchedly vile project cannot be comprehended, and must have spawned from the foulest depths of the netherworld. That this profoundly immoral exploitation was actually carried out seemed to make evil a substance, something oozing forth from the pores of Archibald. Plight's whimpering quickly transformed into traumatic cries of painful struggles as the apparatus was adjusted and the pressure was incrementally and constantly increased. The tender body was warped and shaped into an unnatural form. The pain was excruciating as tender bones were bent and flesh rearranged. No more will be written on this inhuman and ungodly process inflicted on a little one. At her first descent after the first application of the apparatus, the gray woman halted before the last step. She was clearly startled. Quickly she set the food, water, and claws on the small table. She switched waste buckets and left the room without a word. Picaro lay in the corner. He had been beaten when he attempted to stop Archibald's devilishness. Picaro's right eye was swollen shut, and a gash on his cheek bled until it clotted itself. The entire circumference of his waist was severely bruised from the crude iron band as he fought the evil man. It was no contest, and Picaro was left defeated and beaten. "If you take the boy out of the apparatus, you'll be beaten." Archibald ascended the stairs. Picaro's swollen cheek pressed against the stone floor. After hours passed, Plight's cries dampened until he was silent. The old man and the little baby silently lay in the candle-lit dungeon. They looked at each other with differing eyes. Picaro's one eye revealing resignation, Plight's eyes ones of hopeful trust, trust in the old man, trust in Picaro. The old man perceived this and wept. But the little boy needed the old man. The old man knew it, but what could he do? He tried to assess his condition and whether or not he had any broken bones. As the shock wore off, he began to feel the pains and aches. He started to groan, but stopped, not wanting to frighten Plight. They lay there a few feet apart, together in a living sepulchre. Then it began as it did twice a day, the order of service in the morning and the other one in the evening. Vespers now. Archibald the liturgist, Archibald the lector, Archibald the demon. The sounds from above filtered down the stairs and through the cracks in the stone. The chanting, hymning, and reading also flowed to the deep room by means of a ventilation shaft. What was being sung and said in the room above was clearly and easily heard below. Of course, Archibald didn't know this. He was the one singing, the one chanting, the one reading. His voice was melodic and clear. He spoke the word, but the word was far from him. When Vespers was concluded, Picaro spoke softly. "Did you hear that, Plight? We are now in the week of the Annunciation of our Lord. An annunciation is a proclaiming or announcing. Do you remember that part that the angel Gabriel said to Mary? The child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. Jesus means Savior. Jesus is your Savior and mine. He is God, for he is the Son of God. He is man, for he is son of a virgin named Mary. The Savior had to be man, so he could bleed and die for all. The Savior had to be God, so he could redeem all and rise for everyone. You may not know what that all means, but you are listening and you are learning." In this way, Picaro spoke for hours, every day, every week, all months, each year. In addition to theological instruction, he gave him language, history, and number lessons. Plight looked at him, listened to him, and watched him. The boy didn't speak very much or very clearly. The apparatus constricted his throat in such a way that no guttural sounds were possible. So when Plight spoke, the sounds came from the front of his mouth and were almost always higher-pitched single-syllable words. "Nya" was yes, "na" was no. Plight struggled with speech, even as he marveled at Picaro and his old man talk. He said and did things that humored Plight. The reaction to his tricks and jokes were in the smile spreading across Plight's face, the glee in his eyes, and an occasional single "eep" from his mouth. Picaro cared for the boy's other physical needs as well. He massaged his muscles as best he could, especially his legs. All the while the old man spoke. "You must have these legs ready to run. You may get a chance to escape. I'm not sure how that can possibly be, but it may happen. If you do escape, run into the tunnels and find the lady. Don't look back, run. And remember, run into the tunnels and find the lady." The old man let the boy out of the apparatus every day, doing so when he knew that Archibald wouldn't come down. Picaro had the boy run in the confined room in order to get him ready should a chance for escape come. Then there were times when Picaro was reckless and invited trouble. He let the boy out of the apparatus when he knew Archibald might come down to the dungeon. The evil cleric often did. Picaro whispered urgently, "Archibald! Archibald!" The wicked man became furious as he entered the room. He beat the old man severely, leaving him nearly unconscious in the corner. Picaro let this happen for 3 reasons. First, he wanted to impress upon the boy that it was Archibald who was responsible for Plight being in the apparatus. Second, he desired that the boy know that they were in this together and suffered together. Third, he wanted to associate in the boy's mind that the name Archibald was a word of warning of impending evil, a word prompting Plight to run. Thus did their ordeal continue, minute after minute and year after year. Despite their situations and conditions, the two prisoners loved each other and relied on one another. Compiler's note: we deem it beneficial to explain something about what had physically happened to Plight. We also deem it detrimental to elaborate too much on the topic. It should be noted that none of us ever saw Plight. Our collective description below is from written and verbal reports. Body modification is a common practice, and perhaps our readers are familiar with some and had even had some done. Examples of the milder forms are piercing of various body parts, tattooing, elongations of earlobes and lower lips, etc. Moderate examples include neck elongation via ring placements, breast implantation, subdermal implants, tongue splitting, and so forth. Severe body modifications include corseting of children and young women, cranial flattening, foot binding, etc. Plight appears to have been the subject of the most radical and repulsive forms of body modification. An apparatus was used so that his shoulders rested on his knees. In addition, his upper spine curved so that his head was tilted up and his face looked forward. The resultant shape from his knees to his shoulders was that of a flattened, sideways U. The effect was that from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head, he was less than 3 feet tall. He often rested his chin on his knees. His arms were extended to the front in order to maintain balance. We write no more about this except this: Plight persevered, and others have benefited from his story. Chapter 13. Zechariah. The one love that Zechariah had, other than his mother, was that of stories. His mother told him the Bible stories from infancy, and it had continued throughout the years. She immersed him in them. She also included nursery rhymes. He liked these because they were short and kept his attention. His mother used them as an opportunity to explain what words meant and what the nursery rhyme was telling. For example, she explained what nimble and quick meant and how they differed. She told them how it was important for Jack to be both, since the consequences of not being both might mean a burnt bottom from a candlestick. Zechariah would laugh and run around their clay home jumping over make-believe candlesticks. The nursery rhymes gave way to fairy tales. The young boy especially enjoyed the 3 Little Pigs, with all the huffing and puffing. Zechariah's mother began to ask questions about what was going on in the tales, what the characters might be thinking, how they felt, and what Zeki might do. Zeki was the nickname of endearment that she often used. Goldilocks and the 3 Bears scared him, as did Hansel and Gretel. Gurumapa, the giant who took away children who were bad, terrified him, and he was glad that there was no attic in his home. After telling him another fable, his mother asked him if he thought Jack was being adventuresome or foolish with the climbing of the beanstalk. 3 topics fascinated Zechariah. The first occurred when he realized that there could be truths expressed or implied in stories that were not true. The reality of folly and greed, as well as their expressions in the killing of the goose that laid the golden egg. He knew that children who disobeyed their parents often got into trouble and lived with the consequences. His mother assured Zechariah that Gurumapa was make-believe, but that there were things worthwhile to think about in the story. She helped him understand this by telling him about the truths taught in this fable. After a few years, all of this led to the second tier that intrigued Zechariah, namely, how the truths within the various accounts affected people. One day his mother asked him if the story of Gurumapa taught the correct way of helping children learn how to obey and respect authority. She said, "Was terrifying fear the proper motivation for good behavior, Or would it be better for children to learn how to be and how to act based on love and a proper example? He didn't answer. She asked, "Are you having a problem coming up with an answer?" He nodded his head in the affirmative. She continued, "Well, let me restate it, and ask the question differently. Part of the fable is about children's behavior, about whether or not they mind their parents. What way is the best way for minding to happen?" Zechariah said, "You just mind." His mother said, "Perhaps I should try another way." She gathered a couple items and brought them to her son. Her voice became a bit stern as she held them up. "Here is a piece of cord and a wooden spoon. I want you to take the cord and make an overhand knot with it. Do it now." Zechariah took the cord, but only held it. I can't do it. Interrupting him, his mother snapped, "I told you to make an overhand knot. Do it, you insolent boy." "I can't. I don't know how." "Put your hand out, palm side up." Zechariah did, and received a slap on it from the wooden spoon. "Ouch! That hurt. Why did you hit me? I don't know what an overhand knot is. How can I make one?" Her face softened, and she said, "What do you think I wanted to have happen just now? What was my goal here? Either I wanted to punish you, or I wanted you to make an overhand knot. Or I had something else in mind. Can you sort it out?" Zechariah stepped back mentally, distancing himself from what had taken place and the pain. He separated his emotions and feelings from the situation so he could analyze the issues as an observer. "The wooden spoon and the cord are tools that you used to teach me something. Your goal is not for me to know how to make an overhand knot, nor, for that matter, for you to have such a knot. You played a role, being a hard, stern parent who was mean to her child. You made an unreasonable demand so you could inflict pain. It really didn't matter whether or not I could tie the knot. The knot just became a tool for mean treatment. That is not being a good parent. But you did this in order for me to learn a lesson. Sometimes experiencing the lesson rather than being told the lesson becomes more fixed in the mind. So I'm left with two options in this matter. Should a child be punished with the wooden spoon, or should a child be shown the proper way to make an overhand knot, or anything else? I think that I prefer the latter. I also think that you've given me a lesson in parenting when I become a dad someday." His mother said, "Very well thought out. But could you clarify something for me? Could the wooden spoon be used to show a child the proper way?" Zechariah smiled wryly and responded, "You just did use it for that purpose, or at least demonstrating how to be a parent. Mother, would you use the length of cord to show me how to make an overhand knot?" She smiled and showed him. Zechariah thought how all of this affected people. He watched people and listened to conversations. Here was a mother berating a child in public. There was a father who comforted a son who had scraped a knee in a fall. Here were a husband and wife arguing over the best way to treat a child who had repeated some offense. What was their motivation? As he had occasion and opportunity, he would speak with people to learn more. There were labels spoken, like "mama's boy," acting like a young lady, "sissy," "bully," and so forth. There were orders given and compliments made. "Shut your mouth." "Wow, very nicely done." "Get lost." "Good thinking." At times he was baffled. For example, one parent was simply doing what had been done to him as a child. Another parent did the exact opposite of what was done to him as a child. Zechariah worked on developing different perspectives, putting himself in the place of his father, of that girl, of that old woman, of this family, and so on. This often brought him the third topic that fascinated him, the existence of the struggle between good and evil. Chapter 14. The Council. The doctor called the council together. The recruiter wants to pursue the recruit of a particular subject as an assassin. According to our protocol, he has brought one of us to view the subject. The politician has observed him and is in agreement. The next step is to bring him before the full council. The politician said, "He is good, although I'm not certain if he might be better as a spy. He's a local." The general snorted, "I hate spies. The only thing lower are snipers." The doctor continued, "We are not here to share and tell our preferences. Do we proceed with this guy?" The general snarled, but no one spoke. "Raise your hand if you agree to bring him before the council." They all did. Chapter 15. Plight. Picaro and Plight were able to communicate quite well. Years of imprisonment passed. The two inmates grew to love each other. Picaro deemed himself an adequate teacher, but he did wonder whether or not Plight might well be a genius. "Plight, yesterday we reviewed the teaching about the Trinity, specifically that there are 3 persons in the Godhead, and yet there are not 3 gods but one. We talked about our tendency to lean in the direction of tritheism because we can envision a Father, a Son, and a Ghost. So we have to continually focus on the truth that there are not 3 Lords but one Lord. Or is that just me? I don't know. Anyway, I digress. Today we focus on 2 doctrines of the Lord God, universal grace and salvation by grace alone. We hold both to be true. Salvation is available for all, and salvation is by faith alone. How can this be so? Well, Plight, the first is a work done by Christ. The incarnate Son of God shed his blood on the cross to atone for all sins of all people of all times. As Jesus said, "It is finished." The other work is being done by the Holy Ghost, who brings people to faith in Jesus. The gray woman quickly descended the steps and entered the room. For year after year, until a decade or more passed, the gray woman slowly descended as she carried the daily supply items. Normally, Picaro would have continued speaking for her to hear. Not this morning. She hurried and she carried nothing. Plight's eyes darted from the old man to her and back. Her demeanor had completely changed from her continuously silent, emotionless stoicism to one of interested urgency, and for the first time in Picaro's long imprisonment, the gray woman spoke. "Archibald is ill and delirious with a fever. He is not able to leave his bed." Picaro replied without showing any surprise. "What does this mean? Is he going to die?" "No, I don't think so. It means that you two may escape." "Escape? Where to?" "Into the tunnels. There is a secret way in the old supply building across the courtyard. There is a narrow stairwell inside. In the room below, there is a hidden entry point. I have kept materials piled against it for years. No one knows about it. I will lead you there. Get ready to leave now." As Picaro loosened the binding straps on Plight's apparatus, he said, "You must take Plight and get him into the tunnels." Plight squeaked his fear and disapproval. The gray woman was puzzled and said, "You're going too. Quickly now. We must hurry and leave before Archibald wakes." Picaro spoke softly but firmly. "You'll have to go without me. My waist shackle is locked and sealed with a forging that can't be undone. I can't go. Oh, Plight, you must go. I can't escape. It's okay, Plight, it's okay. Plight must get out. You must go with him." She said, "I cannot leave." "Why?" "I can't leave. Either Plight goes now or he stays. You decide now." Plight became agitated as he realized he would be without his loved one. He would be alone and on his own. How would he know where to go? He'd be lost. What was up those stairs and in the world beyond? The old man had invested hours into telling him about trees and sky, people and markets, birds and moon. He had extensive lectures on the tunnels, how to find your way, what he recalled about the layout, what might be deeper inside. But being told is not the same as experiencing. Plight was completely terrified when he thought about what would happen to his pick. In his panic, Plight ran around the room. Suddenly he clung to the old man and eeped. "Silence!" Picaro barked. "You must be quiet. and you must go. The Gray Woman will take you to the escape tunnel. When you get inside the tunnels, find your way to the lady." Plight feebly tried to remove the iron shackle from the old man. Picaro grabbed his hands and held him still. "Plight, I love you so much. You've been the only thing that has kept me sane all these years. God sent you to me. I would not have chosen all this for you, but this is the way that everything has happened to this point. Evil has its day, but good will triumph. Today can be a good day, but you must make it so by taking advantage of it. Now, go." The boy whimpered. They held each other. The Gray Woman nervously gestured for Plight to come with her. "It was inevitable that we should be separated. If you were to stay, it would only be a matter of time before you would be alone and without me. I don't want you to be here alone without me. I do want you to be free. Although physically separated, you'll always be with me, and I will always be with you. Do you understand me?" Plight continued to bury his face in the old man's chest as he shook his head, indicating that he did. "Now, go with the woman. Be quiet. Be silent. Remember, Archibald, Archibald. Run. God be with you. Go, dear Plight." He did. Now completely alone in the stone-cold, silent room, Picaro continued to speak. "Find the lady, Plight. Have your first communion. Your legs are strong, and you've been fashioned for tunnel travel, low and sleek. Lord, be with him and guide him. Plight, do you remember our talks on the personal union of the two natures of Christ? Fascinating stuff when you ponder it, but, of course, one can only delve so far into the subject. To go farther would be beyond what has been revealed to us. Saint and sinner, completely holy and, at the same time, by nature sinful and unclean. Which is more difficult to believe? What do you think, Plight? Or maybe we should approach it from the other direction. Which is easier to believe?" Compiler's note. This note is included for the sake of recording what we know. First, this is the last that the historical records to date contain regarding Archibald, the Gray Woman, and Picaro. Concerning Archibald, we searched the ruins of the stone complex where he resided and ruled. There were no documents, logs, ledgers, or records. We are also not certain if there were any religious monarchs who may have followed him. We leave Archibald and acknowledge that he is receiving his eternal reward. Concerning the Gray Woman, we know nothing. Her name is unknown to us, as is her ancestry. While there are rumors, we will not list them, for they certainly run the broad spectrum. Her act of helping the escape of Plight is commendable, and we will leave her with that great accomplishment. Concerning Picaro, we once again know nothing. It has been difficult for us to know what to include, but surely something must be noted. In our research, we came upon a quotation that Zechariah wrote in his journal. We imagine this to be the best description of Picaro, and for a few moments in time, his plight. There is a musty chronicle written in tolerable Latin, and in it a chapter where every sentence holds a fact. Here is told, with harsh brevity, the strange history of a pair who lived untrumpeted and died unsung 400 years ago, and lie now as unpitied in that stern page as fossils in a rock. Thus, living or dead, fate is still unjust to them. For if I can but show you what lies below that dry chronicler's words, methinks you will correct the indifference of centuries and give those two sore-tried souls a place in your heart for a day. The Cloister and the Hearth by Charles Reade. Chapter 16, Zechariah. Zechariah used his developing skills of listening, pondering, and gaining perspective when listening to the readings from the Holy Writ. From infancy he had heard the historical accounts from the Scriptures as read by the watchmen at mornsong and evensong. When younger, he He didn't always understand the incidents, but he listened with awed fascination, often with his mouth open. One of his earliest favorites was when the shepherds were out in the fields watching over their flocks by night. One angel came leading a host of heaven's angels. What was going on in the minds of those shepherds? They saw and they heard. Their eyes saw angels, and their ears heard, "Fear not." Then there was more. A Savior, a baby, their Savior, in Bethlehem, in a manger. He tried to imagine what was going through their minds. He understood how there could be great fear. But why weren't they afraid of going into Bethlehem to make a pastoral visit, to be in the presence of Christ the Lord? The watchman helped by explaining what was happening and why. Who is afraid of a baby? Not the common lowly shepherds, just a king like Herod. Were the evil ones afraid of this baby? Would good be with and keep this baby? He tried to put himself in the place of the wicked king, and then the newborn king. Here he had no point of reference, and shuddered at the thought of trying to have the perspective of an evil mind. He also could not fathom knowing the mind of God. Zechariah then wondered what was going through the angels' minds. That was no better, and he didn't linger there. Zechariah asked the watchman about this. He told the lad that perhaps the starting point would be the baby's mother, a maiden named Mary. She pondered all these things, and Zechariah should as well. Zechariah asked how this was done. The watchman said, "There are 3 questions that you can ponder that will assist you in these matters. First, what does a particular section of Holy Writ say? Second, what does it mean in its context? Third, how does it apply to you and or to others?" Okay. Go ahead and pick a part of the Bethlehem account. Okay. The part where the angel says that the shepherds will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger. Fine, said the watchman. Now, what does it say? It says just that. It seems pretty clear. True. So what does it mean? And don't forget the context. It means just what it says. Ponder it. This baby is Christ the Lord, the Savior of all. He has come into this world as an infant. He is wrapped in the cloths of a commoner. If the angel had not told the shepherds where to look or what the sign was, they would not have known where to go or what to look for. If they wanted to find their Savior, then they had to listen to the angel and abide by the word. Zechariah, that is just the beginning of the meaning, but it is a good start. That's great. That really gives me something to think about. Now, continued the watchman, how does it apply to you? Later you can ponder how it might apply to others. Well, my Savior came into this world for me. He was born in Bethlehem, and his mother wrapped him in swaddling cloths. Then she placed him in an animal's feeding trough. Okay, so that is where the angels were directed. Does the application for you mean that you should travel to the city of David, locate a certain stable, and find the Christ child wrapped in swaddling cloths? No. So where do you find him? He's everywhere. True. But where is he that you may be in his presence? Zechariah thought a moment and replied, I don't know. He is where he has promised to be. And where's that? Come to the tower at evensong. And you will tell me then, watchman? Zechariah, I just told you. Chapter 17, The Council. The recruiter watched from the market. He had purchased some figs and was eating them. His accomplice was dressed as an old man and was slowly pushing a cart along the edge of the marketplace. A second accomplice was on the opposite side of the market. A third man silently approached the mart from the shaded alley. The recruiter stretched out his arms, which was the signal for the others to begin the capture. The second man started a commotion and got the attention of everyone in the market. The third man came up and administered a temporary paralyzing drug to the back of the neck of the mark. Before the target crumbled to the ground, a dark hood came over his head. The first man turned the cart into the alley, effectively blocking the view of the takedown. He lifted one side of the tarp from the top of the cart, and the mark was rolled into it and quickly covered. The cart never stopped. The third man walked in the direction of the commotion and was lost among the people. The recruiter left for the recruitment center in an obscure area of the desert to the south. That is where the council would meet. Cavin awoke with the hood in place. He was seated in a chair, and his arms and feet were tied to it. There was a noise to his left, and he spoke in his little boy voice. "Mister, I'm scared and I want to go home." A voice replied, "You can stop with the acting job." Cavin continued in the same demeanor. "Please, mister, I want to go home. Untie me and let me go. I won't tell. I won't. Why do you have this on my head?" "I told you to stop with the 'I'm just a little kid and I want my mommy' routine. You're not a little kid, and you can't go home to your mommy. You know that, and so do I." Cavin didn't stop. "The ropes are hurting my wrists. Please untie me and let me go. I really promise that I won't tell anyone. Mister, just let me—" He did not finish his sentence. The doctor had slapped him on the side of his head. Cavin did not see the blow coming. He was dazed, and his ear was ringing. "I told you to stop. Now, we're going to play a little game. I'm going to give you a chance to speak. If you continue with the charade, I'm not going to slap you again. I'm going to punch you like this." The doctor punched Cavin above his right eye. "Do you understand?" The young man spoke in an adult voice and an aggressive manner. "Yes, but you better not make a mistake and let me go. You will pay a price. It's payback, and I always give more than I receive." The doctor approached him from behind and said into his ear, "That's a good policy, and I know that this is your policy. You gave payback and interest to the older boy when you sliced the tendons on the back of his legs. He is still hobbling around." That got Cavin's attention. "I don't know what you're talking about." The doctor hit him again, this time under his left eye. "Don't lie to us. We know all about you. You have certain natural abilities, and you weren't afraid to use them. We've been keeping track of you for some time now. I must say that I was particularly impressed with what you did in murdering your parents." Cavin blurted out a denial and was immediately struck again. He tasted blood from a split lip. "As I was saying, you had a brilliant plan, and you courageously carried it out. Impressive. You used the club to add one more wound to your father's head. Then you murdered him using that rag. Your mother was more difficult, but not because you had any care or compassion or concern for her. She simply resisted more. But you endured, and she succumbed. What I find particularly resourceful, and, quite frankly, surprising, was that you did not flee. You stayed there in that room with 2 dead people until morning. Then you carried out the rest of your plan. So you see, Cavin, there isn't a thing that we don't know about you." The young man replied, "You're a fool if you think I believe that. You don't know what I'm thinking right now." "Oh, it's probably one of 2 things. Vengeance or escape." "Wrong, fool. I was wondering who was the bigger coward here, you or one of the other 3 people with you." "Nicely played, Cavin." "I'm not playing." "Well, I tell you what we're going to do. You'll sit here until tomorrow morning. This will give you a chance to think about things. We're not going to give you anything to eat or drink. That will keep you from relieving yourself." "Cowards! Take this hood off so I can see who is the biggest coward." The doctor made no reply. The council left. Cavin sat alone. Chapter 18. Zechariah. "Are you feeling any better this morning, Mother?" "No, Zechie, I'm not. If anything, my condition is worse." "What did the doctor say?" "I called the old woman. She's much wiser and more experienced. She said that my weariness and lack of vitality aren't something I can get over. She told me to prepare myself." Zechariah looked defiant and stated, "We'll see what the doctor has to say. I'll go get him and bring him here." "Please don't, Zechie. I'm too tired, and I don't want anyone around me except you, the old woman, and the watchman. I need you to do something for me." "Certainly," replied the older boy. "Tell me what you want." "Tell me what you think is going on in my mind." Zechariah exhaled in frustration and said, "Mother, I don't think this is a time to play games." "What I'm asking you to do isn't a game. Focus on our situation and the context. Consider everything through my eyes and tell me what you perceive. Mother, please." Zechariah sighed in resignation and tried to focus. It was artificial and forced. He closed his eyes and concentrated, then attempted not to concentrate. Slowly the conflicting thoughts cleared. He pushed his emotions aside, and finally he spoke. "You're worried about me, concerned for me now and later." He faltered and continued. "You want to know that I'm okay, but you have doubts. In a world of people, I'll be alone. While you aren't terrified of dying, you fear for me. The pains that you're enduring aren't only physical, but ones for me as you anticipate my impending grief." "Yes," she whispered, "but go on. There is a deeper level." Zechariah hesitated, opened his eyes, and replied, "I don't know what that is, and I can't imagine it." She continued, "I'm leaving here, and I'm not yet there. I want so much to stay here and be with you, to see that young woman who'll be your wife, to watch you be a husband and father, to see my grandchildren, and be a part of their lives. My heart aches for myself, for you, and for them. But that isn't going to be for me, and that hurts so terribly much. As the days go by, and as each night is endured, my mind is more and more on the things that are above. There are joys there that await me. I look forward to being with your Father and with our Father. The pain directs my attention to such heavenly realities, and I'm comforted. I'm being drawn away from you, and that's causing both of us to suffer. But the reality remains, and I want to know you'll be okay. No, not that, not okay. Rather, to know you understand. You don't want it to be this way, but you know that it's happening. Anger, resentment, fear, frustration, questioning, reality. All of these are assaulting you. I don't want you necessarily to accept it now. I want you to listen and begin to understand. I love you, Zeki." He spoke quietly. "I understand now, but only with a slight, tentative knowledge. I don't know if I will understand later when the reality confronts me. As for you, Mother, go to sleep. You may rest in peace." She did. Chapter 19. The Council. The recruiter spoke calmly and with compassion. "Cavin, you must be most uncomfortable. I'm going to untie your legs so you can stretch them out a bit. Would that be okay?" The young man didn't answer. The recruiter continued. "I would unbind your hands, but I'm not sure if I trust you. Can I trust you not to hit me and not to run?" No answer. "Cavin, this is an ordeal that you must endure. It can be done the easy way, the more difficult way, or the really hard way. The choice is up to you. Which way do you want it to be?" Cavin winced in pain at his swollen and split lip as he started to speak. "I don't know why I'm here, and I don't know who you cowards are. I don't want it to be any of those easy ways, so I'll tell you this. I want it the really hard way." The doctor approached him and said, "Good. Let me at this boasting kid. He promises much with that mouth of his. Let's see if he can deliver." With that, he punched the hooded Cavin again. Cavin kicked out with his feet in the direction of the speaker. He missed. "I've been hit harder by my father, but he's dead now. You'll be the same when I get my chance. Payback plus street interest." "Yeah, you're really tough, punk. We'll see just how tough. I don't think he'll serve our needs. We'll be wasting our time. We might as well dump him now and be done with him." The recruiter spoke in a tone and manner that intended sincerity and care. "Cavin, I want to untie you so you can get some circulation back into your hands. I want to trust you, but I can't, can I?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you want me to trust you, and I don't." Actually, I only want you to say that you trust me. Saying and doing are two different things. Trust is earned, and it begins with your mouth. I will listen to the way you speak to determine either sincerity or deceit." Cavin said sarcastically, "And you can do that even when I speak with a parched mouth, a split lip, and from under this hood? I would like to take a look at that lip and take care of it. Would you like that?" "No." "I'd like to give you a drink of water. You must be thirsty. Would you like that?" "Yes." "Excellent. That's a start. Don't you want to know why I want you to give me a drink?" "Because you are thirsty?" "No. It's because you would have to take this hood off. Then I could see that other guy who's been beating on me. I want to know what he looks like so I can find him later. Drinking the water would make my lips sting again and remind me of the pain he has caused me. Payback plus. Then the water would allow me enough moisture to spit at him." The recruiter looked at the doctor and mouthed the words, "Psychopath? Sociopath?" The doctor nodded his head and gave the recruiter the thumbs-up sign. The recruiter turned back to the hooded cabin and asked, "Do you want to hurt me also?" "No." "Why not?" Cavin did not hesitate. "Because you're just a tool. I want to use you to get to him and kill him." The doctor left. Chapter 20. Zechariah. Zechariah remained silent and expressed no emotions for days. He was cold and stunned. He was bitter and conflicted. When his mother's friends spoke quietly to him, he did not appear to acknowledge their presence, let alone their words of comfort and compassion. He was alone and wanted to be left alone. When the watchman led the liturgy, his mind was distant. When the watchman delivered the funeral sermon, Zechariah did not hear a word. At the conclusion of the graveside committal, he turned and walked home. The clay home was dark, soundless, and still. So was Zechariah. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he wondered if his mind would adjust to the darkness. But then he didn't care. He saw the book that his mother wanted him to read from after their evening devotions several days before she died. He'd refused. He didn't want stories. Now he looked at the book, At the Back of the North Wind, by George MacDonald, and saw the dog-eared page his mother had made. He didn't want to read it now, but he felt guilty for not doing so when his mother requested it. To alleviate his conscience, he now read the penciled paragraphs, which comprised a conversation between the North Wind, who was God, and a boy named Diamond. At the top of the page, his mother had scrawled, "Diamond is troubled because the North Wind is not only taking special care of him, but will, at the same time, sink a ship with everyone on board." Zechariah sighed and resigned himself to getting this over. "Ah, but dear North Wind, you don't know how nice it is to feel your arms around me. It is 1,000 times better to have them and the wind together than to have only your hair and the back of your neck and no wind at all." "But it is surely more comfortable there." "Well, perhaps, but I begin to think there are better things than being comfortable." "Yes, indeed there are. Well, I will keep you in front of me. You will feel the wind, but not too much. I shall only want one arm to take care of you. The other will be quite enough to sink the ship." "Oh, dear North Wind, how can you talk so?" "My dear boy, I never talk. I always mean what I say." "Then you do mean to sink the ship with the other hand?" "Yes." "It's not like you." "How do you know that?" "Quite easily. Here you are, with one arm, taking care of a poor little boy, and there you are, sinking a ship with the other. It can't be like you." "Ah, but which is me? I can't be two me's, you know." "No, nobody can be two me's." "Well, which me is me?" "Now I must think. There looks to be two." "Yes, that's the very point. You can't be knowing the thing you don't know, can you?" "No." "Then I must be good to you because I choose to be good to you." "Yes." "Why should I choose?" Because you like." "Why should I like to be good to you?" "I don't know. Except it be because it's good to be good to me. That's just it. I am good to you because I like to be good. Then why shouldn't you be good to other people as well as to me? That's just what I don't know. Why shouldn't I? I don't know either. Then why shouldn't you? Because I am. There it is again, said Diamond. I don't see that you are. It looks quite the other thing. Well, but listen to me, Diamond. You know the one me, you say, and that is good. Yes. Do you know the other me as well? No, I can't. I shouldn't like to. There it is. You don't know the other me. You are sure of one of them. Yes. And you are sure there can't be two me's. Yes. Then the me you don't know must be the same as the me you do know, else there would be two me's. Yes. Besides, I tell you that it is so, only it doesn't look like it. That I confess freely. Have you anything more to object? No, no, dear North Wind, I'm quite satisfied. Then I will tell you something you might object. You might say that the me you know is like the other me, and that I am cruel all through. I know that can't be, because you are so kind. But that kindness might be only a pretense for the sake of being more cruel afterwards. Diamond clung to her tighter than ever, crying, No, no, dear North Wind, I can't believe that. I don't believe that. I won't believe that. That would kill me. I love you, and you must love me, else how did I come to love you? How could you know how to put on such a beautiful face if you did not love me and the rest? No, you may sink as many ships as you like, and I won't say another word. I can't say I shall like to see it, you know. That's quite another thing, said North Wind. Zechariah remained still for several moments as he thought about what his mother had been trying to get him to consider. He asked himself, to what end? Why? Then his mind shut and he muttered, I'm confronted with the opposite situation, and it's the more infuriating. Diamond is spared while a boatload of people are taken. For me, a whole city is spared while a single person is taken, my mother. God could have taken the entire city and let my mother live. Better yet, he could have saved all. I agree with Diamond in this point. I can't say I should like to see it. The room remained dark, quiet, and unusually cold. Zechariah had to do something. He perceived within himself three possible reactions: resignation, fight, and flight. A course of action was forming from within his mind. He refused to resign himself to anyone or anything. There was no one to fight, or at least he could not fight the one who could have cured his mother. So Zechariah resolved to take flight. He would run. He would flee to a place where he could be totally alone. He didn't want to see anyone. He didn't want anyone to see him. Zechariah knew what he had to do. The afternoon sun was nearing the horizon as Zechariah quickly prepared his departure. After filling a candle lantern with oil and putting a flint striker into his pocket, he left. With the golden rays of the sun at his back and his shadow extending beyond him, he approached one of the entrances to the tunnel system below the sand dune. He slowed his pace as he quietly drew near where the tunnel guard was posted. The man was assigned to prevent anyone from entering two adjacent tunnel entrances. Zechariah watched him. The guard stood slightly to the side of one tunnel. Periodically he walked some 40 to 50 feet to the other tunnel. When he did, his back was to the nearby tunnel. Zechariah waited to get the positioning of the guard's back and the timing of his short walk. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the time of dusk was at hand. At the right moment, Zechariah made his move. Being as quiet as possible, he ran to the entrance of the nearby tunnel. The young man came from the side, and as he neared the entrance, he kicked the guard's lunch bucket. The noise alerted the guard, who turned. He saw Zechariah. "Get away from my lunch, you thief! I'll brain you!" The guard ran to stop the burglar and rescue his lunch. Zechariah dropped on his hands and knees at the entrance. He quick-crawled in before the guard could stop him. "Hey, you can't go in there!" I'm coming in to get you." However, this guard was built for guarding, not for pursuing through 3-foot-high tunnels. Zechariah crawled 40 feet deeper into the tunnel and entered a clay home. On the opposite wall, he saw the tunnel entrance that went farther into the depths. As the last rays of the sun shone in, he saw the way ahead and entered the opposite tunnel. The guard's bulk blocked the light, not only for Zechariah, but for the guard himself. He couldn't see the way ahead and stopped mere feet inside. The guard shouted, "I'll be waiting for you to come out." The guard continued his threats, which became taunts. "It's just a matter of time. Don't die in there. Don't let anyone or anything kill you in there. It's dark in there. The shadow child roams about in there. You won't see him before he's on you." The guard's words reverberated in the tunnels and echoed in the young man's mind. He crawled through the second tunnel and into another large room. The guard was no longer yelling. Zechariah waited. The silence continued. Zechariah took his flint striker in order to light the candle lantern. Several moments later, and after a flint cut on his finger, the candle lantern was shining brightly. The room brightened and revealed nothing. It was completely empty. There were no pictures or writings on the walls, neither rugs nor clutter on the floor. The only notable feature was the tunnel entrance on the other side of the room. The young man wondered how many years ago it was that this clay home was inhabited. Perhaps 100 years. And the farther he went into the depths of the tunnel, the farther he went back in time. The stillness and quiet afforded him the opportunity to think for a few moments. Zechariah was determined. He was in transition. His old life was behind him, his new life ahead. The candle lantern caused his shadow to be cast on the wall. Two-dimensional darkness in a candlelit room under a mountain of sand. His meditation was abruptly interrupted. The guard's shout echoed to him. "I'm going to get one of the dogs. If you're not out of there by the time I get back, I'm sending him in." Fear and a touch of anger prompted an involuntary flight to the next tunnel. He crawled on 2 legs and 1 hand as he hurried the 40 to 50 feet to the next room, and then to the next, and on until more than 20 rooms were behind him. Zechariah's knees became sand-scraped. A couple of times he skidded his head against the ceiling of the tunnel. He was breathing heavily from the exertion. His sweat cooled him. Periodically he stopped and listened, his beating heart interfering with his hearing. He detected nothing behind him. Still he willed himself to continue at a rapid pace. He manufactured fear and anger as motivation to drive him deeper. The young man noticed that there was a change in the tunnels and the rooms. The tunnels were not as low. There were sections where he could fast walk while crouching with 1 hand to keep him from falling forward. This was a great relief for his bloodied knees. The rooms were also becoming bigger, and there were some where 2 rooms were connected with an arched doorway. Still, they were empty and without any adornments. Zechariah wondered how long ago these rooms were occupied by families who struggled to live, to raise children, and to play with grandchildren, to work, become old, and succumb to death in a legion of ways. He listened. No sounds. Absolute silence. He walked through the rooms and negotiated more tunnels. He listened. No sounds. More tunnels. Bigger rooms. Zechariah became thirsty. Now he was no longer sweating. He realized that he had neglected to bring food and water. He also knew he couldn't go back. It would be impossible with the lower tunnels. Weary from grief, exhausted from physical exertion, and feeling the effects of dehydration, Zechariah began plodding and crouch-walking. A couple tunnels later, and he was having trouble standing and walking. Finally, Zechariah realized he was in trouble, huge, life-threatening trouble. He understood he could die in here. The north wind kept Diamond. What now for Zechariah? The young man resigned himself to the fact that there was nothing for him to do but continue crawling or to die. An hour later, when he emerged from a tunnel, he wasn't able to stand up fully. He fell to the sandy floor. He was now dehydrated and unable to think clearly. He crawled halfway across the room, and lay down. With his cheek on the ground, the young man watched the candle lantern near his right hand. There was not much wax left, and the flame was slowly being extinguished. Zechariah closed his eyes, repented of all his sins, and mentally commended himself into God's hands. The thought that he had before his mind shut down was that of being with his mother. Amen. Chapter 21. The Council. Cavin was kept in a cell. His bindings were removed, and he was allowed to take the hood off. Food and water were rationed to him. He was being kept alive, but barely so. The cell had no windows. Before someone came into his cramped room, he was required to put his hood on, put his hands behind him, and back to the slot in the door where they would be bound. The jailers would bring him out to the chair, secure him to it, and then leave. The recruiter would talk with him, asking if he needed anything that he could get for him. Initially, Cavin's responses were sharp and vindictive. The recruiter was patient and said things like, "It's quite a beautiful day outside, Cavin. The sun is shining, and there's enough of a breeze to be most pleasant. Want to go outside?" Cavin would reply, "I have a hood on. I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't feel the breeze. Are you going to take my hood off?" "Do you want me to?" "Only if I'd be able to see the other guy, the guy I'm going to kill." The recruiter sighed and said, "I guess I can't trust you yet. I'm not sure if I ever will." With that, Cavin was taken back to his cell. This is the way that it was in the first couple of weeks. But Cavin's resolve was eroding. He began to look forward to the recruiter's visit, although he wouldn't admit this, even to himself. He wanted to prolong the time outside his cell. The recruiter took him outside one day and asked, "Would you like me to take the hood off today?" "Yes." "Why?" "I want to see again. I want to feel the sun and wind on my face." "All right. Can I trust you, Cavin?" "Trust me to do what? Trust me to not do what?" "It's not a matter of doing something or not doing something. It's about being. Can I trust you? Are you able to be trusted?" "I don't know. Not sure what you mean." "Well, maybe today is not the right day to take the hood off." "No, please, I'll be good." "It's not about being good. It's about you being trustworthy. Are you trustworthy, Cavin?" "Yes." "All right, let's get that hood off." The recruiter removed it. Cavin blinked and shielded his eyes until they adjusted. He noticed that the recruiter had on a hood with eye, nose, and mouth holes. He seemed slightly disappointed, but said nothing. "Nice?" Cavin didn't look at him when he answered, "No, not nice. Just better." "Why not nice?" "Nice would refer to something you did for me. Better simply describes my situation." The recruiter was amazed and said, "For someone who is a youngster, you seem to understand small differences between words." Cavin replied without looking at him, "I learn and listen in the streets. Also, you have been teaching me." This startled the recruiter. He asked, "How have I taught you?" "It's not how you have taught me. It's when you taught me. You know, like the difference between being good and being trustworthy." The recruiter made no reply for a moment as he thought. Finally, he continued, "Cavin, would you like to be part of a group that is going to change the world?" "The world? You're a fool. Do you think I'm one too?" "Okay, a team that is going to change this part of the world." "I don't play well with others." The recruiter said, "That's exactly what we need, a loner. One who not only doesn't play well with others, but one who also plays well without others. I don't play. Cavin, what I'm offering isn't a game. It's deadly serious. Are you interested?" "What would not be interesting at this point?" The recruiter pushed back, "Yes or no?" "Yes." "I'll speak to the council and make my recommendation. You'll appear before them for their verdict." "Verdict?" "Yes, you will either be accepted into the program, or your sentence will be carried out." Cavin turned to the recruiter and asked, "Sentence?" "Yes, you're under a death sentence." So, my choice is either to be executed or be an executioner. Well, let me see. You know, I did enjoy becoming an orphan. The recruiter shuddered within. He wondered if Cavin could be controlled. He would either be a tremendous asset or a horrible loose cannon. Either way, he thought, Cavin would be able to be used in the preparations necessary for the coming invasion. Chapter 22, Plight. The interruption of a death in progress is not necessarily desired and certainly not painless. In many ways, it's annoying. It's like an invasion that dislodges one's complete unconscious rest. One gains a sense of this when coming out of anesthesia following a surgery. The nurse will ask how you are, what are you feeling, and what you should be doing. Can't these questions be asked and answered later? Can't one just descend back into the bliss of pure nothingness that the soul seeks? One longs for that perfect rest. Its interruption isn't appreciated. First, there was the sound, a short screech that required the sleeping soul to begin the waking process. Connections were slowly being made in the brain. These engaged the mind and started the inklings of thought processes. Still, he had no points of reference for the passing of time. The screech came again. Was this a buzzard hovering over him, trying to make sure he was dead before beginning to feed on him? He thought his eyes were open, but he wasn't sure. He tried to focus them, but there was nothing to see. Second came the stinging pain from his lips. It was like a hot poker being pressed against them. He willed to move an arm in the attempt to stop the pain, but he couldn't do it. He was able to move his head from side to side, however this offered no relief. Zechariah heard the short screech again, but it had been more of an identifiable sound, something like I or A. Maybe it was his hearing that was changing and not the sound. He felt water dribbling beyond his parched lips and into his mouth. His tongue absorbed the first drops. As it reached the back of his throat, he coughed, attempting to keep from inhaling water. In an attempt to stop what was happening to him, Zechariah sputtered out, "No!" He heard, "I." Zechariah continued, "I can't see you." He heard a squeaky, "K." The young man said, "I don't understand." "K." The water slowly refreshed Zechariah, and after a half hour or so he was able to sit. He thought about what he'd done and how foolish he'd been. If it hadn't been for this other person, he'd have surely died. Then he thought about that. He was grateful for the other person, and that meant he was thankful to be alive. He guessed he wanted to live. Zechariah opted for life, and especially in the midst of his grief. He sighed and tried to focus his attention on the one who had given him water. "Thank you."
Yeah.
"What?"
Yeah.
"Did you say yes?"
Yeah.
"Okay, I understand."
K.
Okay. You said okay, right?"
Yeah.
"Okay," said Zechariah, and chuckled as he did.
Yeah.
Squeaked the voice in the dark. "What is your name?"
Pipe.
"Your name is Plight?"
Nah.
"Pipe." Zechariah perceived that this person who had saved his life had a problem with speech. He chastised himself for having an initial thought that this man, or woman, for the voice was very high, was mentally challenged. There was just as good a chance that this person was extremely intelligent, knowledgeable, and discerning. What Zechariah did know was that this person cared enough to keep him from dying. Zechariah continued, "So, even though your name is not Pite, may I call you Pite?"
Yeah.
Zechariah could not keep himself from laughing, and when he did, Plight emitted a gig, which is a single-syllable giggle, and, after a gulp, followed it a few seconds later with the word fun. "It's dark in here, and there's no candle left in my lantern. Pite, are you actually able to see in these tunnels and rooms?"
Yeah.
"Amazing. Would you help me get back out?"
Nah.
answered Plight, and began to tug on Zechariah's arm, intending to lead him across the room and deeper into the tunnel. He went where Plight guided him. When they went some distance in the room, Plight stopped and said, "Dow." "Dow?" Plight took Zechariah's hand and guided it to the tunnel roof in front of them. "Ah, down," he said, and continued with, "Thank you."
"'Kay."
Zechariah stooped and moved through the tunnel. Even though he couldn't see Plight, or, as we know him, as Plight, Zechariah sensed that there was no change in Plight's way of walking. He moved quickly, fluidly, and without hesitation. Occasionally, as they entered a room, Plight moved them in a 90-degree turn. Soon, Zechariah had no idea whether or not they were heading back to the entrance or deeper into the tunnel system. He guessed, and rightly so, that they were heading deeper. The height of the tunnel walls and the great expanse of the rooms and the number of adjoining rooms indicated that this was so. After one turn into a tunnel, Zechariah noticed a faint light far off. "Is that the glow from a light I see ahead?"
"Yeah."
Understanding that Zechariah could now see well enough to prevent a head bonk, Plight let go of his arm. They walked side by side and moved steadily in the direction of the light. Although unable to see specific physical features, Zechariah could tell with his peripheral vision that Plight was short. He wondered if his guide was a child or a midget, perhaps even a girl. He decided that he would know soon enough. Exiting a particularly lengthy tunnel, one that had tunnels branching off from it, they entered a lit room. Zechariah turned to look at Plight and was visibly shaken. Before him was a deformed creature, one who was bent beyond imagination. The person in front of Zechariah was about 3 feet tall. Even when standing, Plight could rest his face on his knees. His hands could hang down to the ground, and he was able to walk on all fours. Zechariah let out an involuntary, "Oh!" Plight mimicked him, "Oh!" and then added,
"Fun."
"Fun? What do you mean? It can't be fun."
"Fun."
Zechariah considered the fact that Plight only spoke in single syllables, and what he said could either be an entire word or the first syllable of a longer word. "Fun? Ah, you mean funny."
"Yeah."
"Okay, now I understand. Funny. Wait. What is funny?"
"Meep."
came the reply. "Do you mean the way you are inside?"
"Nah."
"Do you mean the way you look on the outside?"
"Yeah."
Zechariah said with conviction, "No, Plight, you're not funny looking. In fact, do you know what you look like to me?"
"Nah."
"When I look at you, I see the person who saved my life, and that looks pretty fine to me right now. Got it?"
"Yeah."
"Do you understand me, Plight? You look great. Got it?"
"Yeah."
A voice came from the next room, the large room where the light was shining brightly. "His name is Plight, and he understands you perfectly well. He is not a freak of nature. Rather, what you see is the deformation made at the hands of a purely evil man." Zechariah asked in anger, "Someone did this to him?" "Yes," answered the man, and continued, "and we don't know who it was. Plight came to us in great fear. He was afraid of what was behind him and fearful of us. He trembled and spoke the word 'pick' over and over." At this, Plight looked back into the tunnel and said, "Pick." Zechariah turned and saw a lamentable sadness on the face of Plight. Zechariah queried, "Pick?"
"Yeah."
"Yes," said the man. "Pick is the name of someone, perhaps the only one, who actually cared for Plight and loved him in the past. We don't know the details, but we do know that Plight escaped from the physical torture, but now is left with the uncertainty about his Pick's situation." "Who would do this?" "We don't know, and Plight gets agitated when we try to find out more. It is clear that he doesn't want to think about his torturer, so we try to occupy his mind and time with what is pleasing to him and beneficial to us. Right, Plight?"
"Yeah."
"Let me tell you something," said the man, and then stopped with his intended sentence. "By the way, who are you?" Zechariah spoke in a contrite manner. "I'm a rather foolish fellow who really deserves to be dead. My name is Zechariah, and I'm also a very fortunate man because of Plight. My mother recently died of cancer, and I wanted to get as far away from my everything, I guess. I'm so stupid. I couldn't run away from my past or my thoughts. It almost cost me my life. which I didn't care about at the time, but do now. Do you care now? Yes. And who are you? I'm Lester, librarian of the lady and friend of Plight.
Yeah.
Step into this room and I'll show you around, and then we can go into the great room. Zechariah did. While this room was vacant, he could just hear a couple of people talking in some other room, presumably the great room. Lester pointed to various doorways and identified them as the ways to storage and dormitory rooms. This room looks ready to be occupied. It is. When and if it is needed, there can be up to 100 people living in here. The librarian continued as he guided Zechariah to one of the doorways. We're entering the great room. I'll show you the entry points of the library, the kitchen, the supply room, the northern access, the dormitory, the ladies' quarters, and a few other rooms. Zechariah asked, "Where does the light come from? I don't see any source." Lester answered, "It is natural lighting from above. We don't know much about it, but we are thankful for it. It lights up all the rooms, but not as brightly as here in the commons. The further you get away from these rooms, the darker it becomes. That is why we are very fortunate to have Plight. One of his vocations is as the ladies' acolyte.
Yeah.
He keeps certain areas and tunnels lit, depending, of course, on what is needed by the community. Plight also serves as a messenger and is able to deliver bundles of supplies, like water, to a poor soul who has become lost in the maze." Zechariah smiled as he looked at Plight and said, "I'm glad of that."
Yeah.
Lester agreed and continued, "Plight is also able to lead others throughout the tunnel and room system. Plight has everything memorized and can quickly lead others here and there. We could do all this without him, but we would be very, very severely hampered. In addition, Plight is able to make it to the entrances of the tunnel in 30 to 40 minutes. It would take the rest of us many hours, and we would be bruised by the crawling. Plight just runs." Zechariah laughed. "Fun." Zechariah spoke to Lester. "A few moments ago you were going to tell me something. Instead you asked about me. What was it you were going to say?" Let's see. I think it was something about Plight." "Right. While Plight is only able to speak in single syllables and only form those syllables in the front and upper part of his mouth, he is well educated. There is some reason why he's not able to read or write, but I don't know what it is. I can only surmise that his teacher didn't have access to materials. In addition, I can't imagine him being able to sound out words. There's no doubt that he has phonemic awareness, but is plagued with the inability to formulate phonics. So, one of his favorite activities is listening to someone read aloud. Once again, Plight is extremely intelligent. I don't know what his IQ is, but there is no doubt that it is very high. Also, he's very knowledgeable in theology, being able to relay what the formal and material principles of various religious groups are. He is particularly adept in Christian doctrine. This was all taught to him over the course of his life by Pick." "Pick," Lester continued. "The only drawback is you must frame your questions so he can answer with yes or no. For example, Plight, is the hypostatic union true for Jesus the Christ?"
Yeah.
"Does the hypostatic union of Jesus the Christ mean that there are two persons and two natures?" Plight did not hesitate.
Nah.
"So are there two persons and one nature?"
Nah.
"Are there one person and two natures?"
Yeah.
Zechariah was astonished and exclaimed, "Excellent! He was right, wasn't he?"
Yeah.
Lester laughed and said that Plight was correct. Zechariah asked, "So, let me see. Plight, what do you think? Are Eutychianism and Nestorianism the same or opposites?"
Yeah.
was Plight's reply. "What? Wait. My fault. Are they the same?"
Yeah.
Zechariah continued gently, aren't they opposite?" Lester smiled coyly.
Yeah.
"Right. One has blended the two natures into one new nature, while the other said the two natures remain separate."
Yeah.
Lester spoke. "Plight also answered your first question correctly. They are the same in that they are both heresies. You have to be careful about how you frame your question."
Yeah.
Zechariah grinned and said, "Aha, very good. Excellent, in fact. I really enjoy spending time with my friend Plight."
Yeah.
Lester said, "That will likely be possible. For now, we must get you more to drink and give you something to eat. Then we can set you up with a bed and wait for the lady to determine what you'll be doing here and how long you'll be with us." Wait, that did sound a bit ominous, didn't it? But please don't worry. You'll have some say in all of this as well. Chapter 23, The Council. Cavin sat on a chair in front of the council. He was unrestrained and without the hood. Before him were 4 men, each with a black hood with holes for eyes, nose, and mouth. One sat in front of Cavin, while the other 3 stood, one of them behind him. Cavin perceived from the walk and manner that it was the recruiter behind him. This was confirmed when the recruiter spoke to begin. "Cavin, you've been accepted to begin your training. Depending on your assignment, your training will last from 6 months to 5 years. The general interrupted. "I have no use for him. As far as I'm concerned, he has little or no respect for authority. The people in my charge have to be able to count on one another and work in unison. One of you others can have him." The politician spoke. "There might be a spot for him with me, although it would have to be a secondary assignment. That is, of course, if he has the intelligence for the university curricula and the ability to stay focused. However, this would be in support of a primary assignment under the direction of another." Cavin restrained himself. He had no interest in attending the university. Books, studying, going to class, and sitting for examinations held no interest for him. Still, he remained silent and gave no outward indication of his lack of enthusiasm. The doctor cleared his throat and said, "Seems obvious what his assignment should be." Cavin started at the sound of the voice. It was the man who had hit him repeatedly. It was the man who would get some payback. Cavin tried to identify any features on him. Slender build and average height. His hands were muscular and calloused. Dark eyes and maybe, just maybe, dark circles under his eyes. Nothing especially remarkable, but he knew the voice, and Cavin held that in reserve. The unremarkable man continued. He should be initiated into the ranks of the Hash-As-Asim. If there are no objections, I'd say do it now. "Fine with me," said the general. The politician said, "I have no objections, but if this is done, he'll be of no use to us at the university or in any community office." Cavin said, "What is the Hash-As-Asim?" The recruiter answered him, saying, "These are trained assassins, killing in stealth in 100 ways. You'll be trained to do just that, kill in 100 different ways. You'll learn to approach without detection, blend in with the dusk, and disappear like the morning fog, silent and stealthy." "That interests me." "Really? Because it'll require the cutting out of your tongue. Are you still interested?" Cavin gulped. He had heard of the Hash-As-Asim and knew they were assassins feared by many. He also doubted whether or not those people even existed. "You aren't saying anything, Cavin?" The doctor asked sarcastically. "Have you lost your tongue, boy? Or are you just practicing?" The recruiter continued. "Those who volunteer for the Hash-As-Asim have their tongues immediately cut out. That is the last clear word they ever speak. When they say it after that, it comes out of a tongueless mouth sounding something like ha-ha-ha-see. They continue the training, and those who qualify and who continue to qualify can remain within the group." "And for those who do not qualify?" queried Cavin. "Those individuals are given a 4-hour head start in a training mission for those who do qualify. It provides the sharpening of skills." The young man asked further, "What group do you 4 represent?" The politician answered, "We do not represent a group. We represent a nation, the Sandmen Nation." Cavin nodded and responded, "Okay, I volunteer, but you'll need to make a change. I'll be Hash-As-Asim, and I will keep my tongue. We need to have locals with local information, experience, and language. You don't need to insert me. I am already here. You want me to do that so I can infiltrate the university and do so without suspicion. I can also take an interest in the community. That means that the politician will be my primary handler." No one spoke for a few moments. The council members looked at one another, attempting to read each other, attempting to send and receive nonverbal communication. This was difficult with the hoods on. Finally, the general spoke. "I'm in favor of this. We need to learn to adapt to what the theater of war is presenting us. Let's vote on Cavin's proposal. Raise your hand if you are in agreement." 3 did. The doctor did not. Cavin smiled inside. "Too bad. We need all 4 to agree," announced the general, and began to continue. "Too bad for you, Cavin. You will be executed in the dawn. Now Cavin interrupted. "Why don't you let those losers of yours try to sharpen their skills? I only need a 3-hour head start. If I survive, then you let me into the Hashasasim program and begin my infiltration of the university culture and the community political scene." The general said, "Raise your hand if you want to give Cavin the opportunity." All did. Cavin asked, "How many of your hounds will be trying to get me?" The doctor answered, "One of the qualified members of our Hashasasim will be pursuing you. This assassin will not be trying to just get you or catch you. His or her mission is to kill you. And, by the way, your 3 hours has started, and your time is ticking down." Chapter 24. Zechariah. Zechariah stayed in his quarters for the remainder of the day and throughout the night. His youthfulness permitted him to regain his hydration and recover quickly. After a few days, he felt the pangs of grief when he first awoke, and especially so at times when he was alone with his thoughts. But he perceived that his grief didn't have the harsh edge that sliced quickly and cut deeply into his soul. He observed that it was evolving into a stunning ache that overcame him. But this would dissipate when he was involved in activities that required him to focus his attention on the present, like conversations with Plight and Lester. This realization caused him to experience guilt, and he chastised himself, for he'd forgotten about his mother. At such times he'd strolled about with his head down, quite self-absorbed in his thoughts and in his wrestling with the Lord his God. The orders of morn song and evensong were conducted in the meeting room, and Zechariah was encouraged by the word and by those who assembled. Attendance seemed to be the same at all services, perhaps 40 or so, but they were not always the same people. Plight was often there, but not always. Zechariah imagined him away on some task, which was probably true for others as well. Watchman Thomas was old, but still led the services decently and in good order. He properly distinguished and applied law and gospel. Zechariah was edified by the truth and comforted in the uniformity and familiarity of the orders. Mornsong and evensong were the same as they were out in the city with Watchman Pintoc. The young man also started to feel the need to do something. He longed to talk to Plight, but his new friend had been sent to the entrance several times each night as a courier and to pick up supplies and messages. Zechariah was becoming bored. After mornsong a day or so later, a man approached him and introduced himself as a disciple and added, "I am simply known as a disciple, but I also have the vocation of pointer." Zechariah shook his head and asked, "I, too, am a disciple, and there appears to be many other disciples here. What do you mean by pointer?" "I follow and point. The others follow." "Who do you point to and follow? The lady?" "No, I point to and follow the king. You follow the king too, do you not?" "Yes," answered Zechariah. "Excellent," the man added in an even tone. He added, "I've brought a message to you from the lady. You're to report to Lester the librarian for your work assignment. That is, of course, if you wish to stay here with us." Zechariah thought about what brought him here and what he had back in the city. He was inclined to accept the assignment, but thought of something. "Perhaps I could meet the lady and ask her a few questions that I have on my mind." He didn't really have specific questions in mind. He thought that by saying so it might gain him leverage in meeting the lady. The man smiled as he replied, "As to the first, you have already met her." I haven't met her." "Yes, you have. Now, as to your questions, It is best to speak to your supervisor, and that would be Lester. Indeed, Zechariah said. I'm on my way to the library. Indeed, repeated the pointer. As Zechariah crossed the great hall and walked into the direction of the library, he noticed Plight emerging into the room from an entrance tunnel. Hi, Plight.
Aye.
I'm going to the library. Want to come with me?
Yeah.
They entered the short tunnel to the library. Lester was just inside the room. Plight came in and said aye to him, and the librarian greeted him. Zechariah noticed a sign suspended above the entrance doorway. Be warned, the writing of many books is endless. Zechariah pointed to the sign and said, That seems to be a bit strange to hang that at the entrance to a library. Yes, Lester replied, very strange indeed. Who put it there? Lester looked at the author of this manuscript and pointed it at me, saying, That guy did. Plight and Zechariah turned and shifted their gaze to me. I said, What? Get on with it. They did so, as was my will, and as it is written. Zechariah said to Lester, I was told to report to you about my assignment in the library. Yes, I heard from the lady earlier. You're to serve an internship here and be under my direction and supervision. I don't know how long you'll be here, so as far as I'm concerned, I want you to read, study, think, and process. All right. Lester explained the layout of the library and the ways that the holdings could be searched and assessed. Additions to this library's holdings had been canceled a couple of years earlier. A new library was going to be built farther to the north. Here there were two primary tunnels, one for fiction and the other for nonfiction. Each one extended back according to date, the most recent closest to the front, the most ancient in the farthest reaches of the tunnels. There were interconnecting tunnels that permitted a person to go back and forth from the fiction, nonfiction stacks. Searches could be made by author, title, genre, keyword, etc. Any questions? Yes, said Zechariah. Why is a new library being built? 2 reasons. First, we are running out of space here, and the layout is not the best. We need to have more lateral tunnels for the newest works. That would alleviate the need for us to do so much shelf shifting. Second, this library is vulnerable to attack. It is too close to the entrances. If the Sandmen ever take over the city and begin entering the tunnels, it would be difficult for us to defend the library and protect the holdings. We have 5 full-time workers here now. We are working together to implement a plan to preserve our collection. In addition, there are 22 others who are able to help move the collection in case of attack. Is an attack likely to happen? Likely, unlikely. Preparation. Now, any more questions? Not really, said Zechariah, and then added, Could Plight come with me? He'd be a big help in me not getting lost, and I'd enjoy the company and the opportunity to read aloud. That's up to Plight. He's free to do as he prefers when he has the time.
Yeah.
Lester began to move away and said as he did, There is a scribe's satchel for you on the shelf to your left. Inside is a blank journal. Record what you deem important. It's for you to fill out for yourself. He stopped, turned to Zechariah, and said, Find the purpose of the work and discover the intent of the author. In order to do that, you'll need to gain perspective. The time's perspective, the author's perspective, the culture's perspective. Then compare that with the perspectives of other people, societies, and cultures. Then slot yourself into the topic. What biases do you have, and are they affecting your decisions compared to judgments of the past? The young man asked, Would you please give me an example of what you mean? Yes. I want you to tell me your immediate reaction to what I'm now going to say. Ready? Sure. Japs declare war on U.S. Japs butcher Americans. Zechariah visibly cringed. He said, That bothers me. It's not right. What bothers you? The attack? You know what it is that bothers me. Yes, I do. It's the word Japs, right? Yes, that's not a word that I would say. Why not? Do those newspaper headlines from that time centuries ago tell the truth, or are they lies? Does the word Japs bother you because you are succumbing to what was known in the old United States some 60 years later as political correctness? It's disrespectful. It's disrespectful now to you. Was it disrespectful back then when it had just happened? When hundreds of U.S. planes and ships were destroyed? When 2,400 U.S. military personnel were killed and another 1,100 wounded? What say you? I don't know enough to answer your question. Lester pressed him. You don't know enough to answer the question, or you don't know enough to render a judgment. Both? Ah, but you already made a judgment. Disrespectful. Are you correct in saying that it's disrespectful now, and the same back then? Or was it okay to use the word Japs back then? Zechariah proceeded cautiously. Perhaps I don't have enough information about what took place back then to answer your question. Very true, and a stellar attempt at diversion. But let's stay on task here. If you were to engage in a concerted effort to research and get educated on the issues back then, is it possible that your mind might be changed, by the facts? I don't know. Not good enough. Let's pursue this further. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, war was declared. In the months that followed, over 100,000 Japanese were relocated from their homes in the old United States and put into internment camps. More than half of them were U.S. citizens. In addition, Japanese people were excluded from the western coastal states in the U.S. Less than 50 years later, it was decided that the internment and incarceration of these people was wrong and unlawful. Justice had been denied them. So, do you agree with the 1941 crowd or the 1991 folks? The young man replied, I guess I tend to side with those living in 1991. Why? Well, because I suppose that is the more informed position, and because it tends to harmonize with my perspective. Also, because the way you framed the question caused me to lean in that direction. Do I agree with the crowd or with the folks? A crowd can be unruly, while folks are just fine and friendly. Lester smiled, but did not stop. So, why did the 1941 folks do what they did? The nation had been attacked, and there were many in the Japanese crowd who had been born in Japan. Others were second and third generation. Zechariah said, the U.S. had been attacked once, and while that was totally wrong, it was also wrong for the U.S. to take such an unnecessary, inhumane, and illegal action against the Japanese people living in the U.S. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. That's not the issue at hand for you. Think about what you just said and the declaration you just made. You said the U.S. had been attacked once. If you go back into the library, you might find books, essays, and articles that address the number of times that the Japanese attacked the western coast of the U.S. You might find that there were attacks from the Aleutian Islands and Alaska to the north, all the way down the coast to what was once known as Southern California. Thousands upon thousands of fire balloons were released in order to set the forest lands ablaze. One firebomb killed a pregnant mother and 5 youth at Bly, Oregon. There were attacks from submarines and aircraft. Those are the historical facts, and they don't require an opinion. Okay, and agreed, admitted Zechariah. Now, add another reality. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Nazi Germany was waging war and invading nations. The east coast of the United States was being monitored and patrolled by German naval forces. The Battle of the Atlantic began in 1939 and continued until the end of the war. In 1941, a German spy ring operating in the U.S. was exposed and 33 spies were arrested. Once again, those are facts. If you do more research, you will find more historical events that will help you develop the historical landscape. I'll do that. But there is more, or at least this all will lead you to what the leaders and the citizens of the U.S. might be thinking and what questions they might have. The unprovoked attack on the U.S. at Pearl Harbor and the killing of thousands of U.S. military personnel caused a great deal of anger and fear. Were there Japanese spies already in the U.S.? Should they continue presuming that there were or were not? Was an invasion force assembling somewhere along the West Coast? How many people of Japanese ancestry, whether U.S. citizens or not, would be sympathetic and supportive to an invasion? How many would not only be supportive, but would join forces? How vast was the fog of war? In light of what was known, and especially in what was not known, what was the best way to protect the nation? And even this, what is the best way to protect those of Japanese ancestry now residing in the U.S.? Zechariah suggested, "You're leading me to the point where I might understand why this action could have been undertaken." Yes, while at the same time neither giving my approval nor stating my disapproval. Or said another way, without either my condemnation or my commendation. Then that leads to another issue or opportunity. What was the historical situation for the 1991 people that caused them to react the way they did and renounce what the 1941 people did? Lester nodded in approval and added, "Very good. Then you must go even one step further by addressing advanced interrogation techniques in protecting a people. When might it be right? When might it be wrong? Establish your two extremes and work your way to the dividing line. Will the dividing line change based on the particular situation? Finally, apply that to what is taking place with us here today. Please go on. What is to be done about the Sandmen who have vowed to destroy us? Is our decision, is your decision on what to do going to be based on what is best for the people as a whole, or on the rights of the individual? If you err, will it be on the side of caution, expecting the worst, or the side of what you want the resolution of the conflict to be?" Zechariah replied, "These are complicated issues. It seems, in order to make wise and prudent decisions, as well as carry them out, we need to study history, be aware of current events, and know our individual starting points, our personal situations. There is much to do. Yes, and you should go digging in the library's tunnels. Take your satchel and get to work." Plight voiced his approval with a simple,
"Yeah."
Chapter 25, Cavin. A 6'8" man will draw attention to himself as he stands head and shoulders above others. A woman over 6 feet tall will do the same. The big man can be viewed as threatening, while the woman is remarkably memorable. Put another way, these big and tall people aren't able to go about without being seen or recalled. Both are quickly named. The man is given the name High Pockets, and many will laugh, although not so he can necessarily hear them. The woman might be called Amazon. A person of small frame has the advantage of not being noticed. The smaller person, particularly a man who is slender and a few inches shorter than average, goes about unnoticed and unnamed. If he has a bit of acting ability and is able to use disguises, he can pass himself off as an older child. Then, within a slight moment, he is a young man in his 20s. If he has enough time, he can become a frail old man tottering about. Add in agility, nimbleness, fluid motion, and strength, and the reader will behold Cavin the athlete. Take away a conscience, restraint, and morality, and there is Cavin the psychopath. Mix these with patience, intelligence, and the powers of observation, and there is left a monster. Cavin had honed these latter qualities while hidden behind the curtain in his niche. From there he watched his parents, particularly his father. Cavin started reading tells at an early age. It was a matter of survival. A slight facial twitch, a quick glance of the eyes, and seemingly insignificant finger movements would convey messages. He knew when his mother was going to speak and what her demeanor was going to be. This told him if she was going to be submissive or aggressive, which also indicated if she was going to speak to her husband or to her son. He'd watched his father and knew whether he was going to speak or act, as well as who was going to be the focus of his brutishness. These latter abilities were ones that Cavin developed while his parents were still alive. He continued refining them, and they were serving him well. Although the doctor was hooded, Cavin had been able to read the tell in his eyes. He had looked away for just an instant. The doctor was not telling the truth. Tick noted. As Cavin left the small building and jogged to the northwest and in the direction of the city, he tried to run through his mind what the lie might have been. The doctor had said that one of the Hashasasim would be after him. Would there be more than one? Although Cavin said he only needed a 3-hour head start. No one confirmed that he had this. The doctor had merely said the clock was ticking. The implication was that Cavin had 3 hours. Implications could kill. But they had all voted on Cavin's proposal. So, would Cavin trust them? Not a chance. Not even the recruiter would be trusted. In fact, Cavin only trusted that they would not do as they had said or implied. Cavin constantly questioned himself as he continued in the direction of the city. What were they trying to achieve? Were they divided in their goals? Is anyone following me? No one that I'm able to notice. Did one of the members of the council want him alive and another want him dead? How and in what ways were they deceiving him? What resources did they have in the city? As Cavin jogged along, he began forming 2 plans. The first was a short-term plan that would deal with more than one assassin after him, and that he had much less than 3 hours before the pursuit began. The other plan was long-term and involved the council. As he approached the city, Cavin went into boy mode. He kept to the shadowed side of the street and tried to blend in with the others. It was mid-afternoon, and the traffic was generally in the direction of the marketplace. At this point, he was not concerned about being followed. In fact, he preferred it. There were too many people for an attack to take place in such a public place. His house was on the other side of the marketplace. He hoped no one had moved into the abandoned house since he'd been captured and held. There would be some things there that he needed to get, and squatters would be a problem that he didn't need right now. His house was also the place where he wanted his pursuers to know where he was or where he'd been. Cavin turned onto the sandy street and saw old Rose in front of her house. "Hi, old Rose," Cavin called out in boy mode. "Good afternoon, Cavin. You've been gone for quite some time. We were wondering where you were. We hoped nothing had happened to you." "Nah, I'm fine. I went out doing some exploring to the south of town. Hi, Ellie." Ellie came out the front door and stood beside old Rose. Ellie always felt uncomfortable around him. She said, "Hi, Cavin." Old Rose continued, "That's getting to be a dangerous place. The Sandmen are creeping up from the south like the dune is from the east. Anyway, we're glad to see that you are back." "Yeah, but I'm going to be heading out soon. I just stopped by to get a few things at the house. I want to go exploring some more." Old Rose asked, "Where are you going?" "I'm not going to the north." There was a moment of silence as the 2 orphans tried to imagine if they heard him correctly, and, if they did, what he meant. Old Rose told him to wait a moment. She went into her house and put a few food items in a sack. She returned and told him that these might be of some help to him on his journey. "Very likely," he said as he took the sack. Ellie responded, "A thank you would be nice." Cavin just stared at her as he tried to prevent himself from going into man mode. Old Rose interceded. "It's okay. I'm sure Cavin has got a lot on his mind right now, what with the fact that he is not going to the north." Cavin looked at old Rose. He tried to determine if she meant more than what she said. Unable to do so, Cavin turned and went to his house. As he opened the door, Cavin noted the crude detection measures he'd set in place. All devices were as he had left them. The house was still, quiet, and stale-smelling from being closed up. He checked the back window and verified it had not been opened. Now he moved quickly and efficiently. The items in the secret floor spot were retrieved and placed into the sack. He decided to leave everything else as it was, including the detection devices, some of which had to be reset. After removing a couple boards from the deep corner wall behind the curtain, where he had silently huddled for so many years, he departed. With the boards back in place, he remained hidden in the alley as he listened. Cavin took 20 minutes to move undetected to a point where he had a clear view of the front of his house, which was some 200 feet away. He was along a narrow side street where people walked and yet was very much hidden. A person traveling by him on foot could have been snatched by Cavin and pulled into his dark hiding spot. He was like a deadly spider hiding in the dark and waiting for a victim passing by to be plucked into his web. Cavin became the spider. He waited and watched. 2 kids playing in the street. He knew them. An old man. Normal walk. Seen him before but didn't know him. No threat. A couple at the other end of the street looking at baked goods. Never seen them. Don't think that they are a threat. Will keep them in mind. A middle-aged man. Nothing suspicious, but that was suspicious in itself. Walking with a purpose. Going right by Cavin. He'd definitely keep that man in mind. 3 old women. He knew them. No threat. Cavin kept at this surveillance for more than an hour. Then Cavin saw him. A man dressed slightly different from others. He walked with a fluid motion, with confidence, as he gave no appearance of surveying the area, even as he did. The man saw old Rose sweeping in front of her house. He went over and began talking to her. Cavin couldn't hear their conversation, but was able to discern something from their body language. He was showing respect. She was welcoming and didn't feel threatened. He asked her something and waited. She pointed in the direction of Cavin's house. He gave a quick glance at it, but turned away. An ordinary person would have looked at it longer. He had just marked it in his mind. They talked for a few more minutes. Then old Rose laughed at something and pointed up the street where Cavin was. The man gave a gratuitous laugh, but it was obvious he was genuinely interested and also seemed puzzled. Cavin smiled. He knew, if he were closer, that old Rose just relayed what Cavin had said. "I'm not going to the north." The man nodded. Old Rose smiled. She waved goodbye. He left. The man slowly walked up the side street and glanced at Cavin's house without focusing on it. As he approached it, he veered slightly to his right. This put him on the opposite side of the street from the house and beside an old shed. If he kept on this path, he would come within a foot of where Cavin was standing. Cavin's pulse quickened as he prepared to snare the victim. Old Rose was still sweeping, and she was now turned away from his direction. Cavin checked for others. He was in full man mode. The street was clear. As the man walked past the house, Cavin thought he saw something fall from the man. He was sure he saw it. The man continued. 25 feet. Cavin mentally went through how he would snatch and dispatch the man in one fluid movement and in a fleeting moment. 10 feet. Cavin relaxed in order not to work against himself or to be clumsy at the instant of attack. 5 feet. Cavin breathed a silent, shallow breath. 0 feet. Cavin didn't move. He wasn't exactly certain why, but an undeniable instinct forced him to do nothing. An inkling froze him. The man passed by as Cavin held his breath until the man was beyond him. Why hadn't he gone through with it? What was his instinct trying to tell him? As he watched the man continue to the north, it suddenly came to him. He understood why he'd not attacked the man. He momentarily smiled at his stupidity and then chastised himself for being careless. Cavin could be dead right now. The item that the man dropped was a marker, something intended to let the next man know where the house was. That also meant he didn't know exactly where Cavin was. The house was marked. In addition, and more importantly, the man carried on a conversation with old Rose. So, that man still had his tongue, and thus he was not Hashasasim. The next man was supposed to see the marker. The next man wouldn't speak with old Rose or anyone. He'd be Hashashasim. The first man was the bait. The second man was the assassin. Cavin waited and watched. Hours went by. As he did, he thought about what the doctor said. Only one would pursue him. Only one Hashashasim. The doctor told the truth and had deceived in doing so. Cavin would have a 3-hour head start. The first man had been less than 2 hours behind him, but the 3 hours had been for the Hashashasim. So the doctor told the truth and had deceived in doing so. Cavin muttered one word to himself: payback. In the early evening, an obscure figure glided along the side street and stopped by the marker. He, or she, wore a dark hood. Cavin was astonished at how quickly, silently, and stealthily the Hashashasim moved across the street and behind the house. After 10 minutes or so, Cavin caught a glimpse of him far up the street to his right. Cavin wondered how the assassin had been able to do that without having been seen. Yet, in all this, Cavin didn't doubt his ability to take out this enemy. Just as he was about to leave his hiding place, another figure moved into the area. This was a man in regular street clothes, and he neither concealed nor advertised his presence. He walked to the marker and noted the house. The man wrote something on some paper, then he picked up the marker and followed in the direction of the other two. Cavin waited and watched until dawn. No one else came by or came back. The spider came out of its hiding place and spoke as one taking an oath: "The lamb, the killer, and the reporter, they will be taken out." In Chapter 26, Zechariah. Zechariah entered the stacks of the library and was amazed. The number of books and the length of the shelves were overwhelming. He wasn't certain where to begin. He decided to get an estimation of its size by going back into the tunnels. This was the equivalent of going back in time. The most recent year of holdings had shelves that extended nearly 200 feet in the fiction section and a fourth of that distance in the non-fiction section. The year lengths shortened the farther back Zechariah went. He stopped and began perusing the shelves of the mid-1950s. The Fall was a title that interested him, and he stopped at a page and read silently. I am not hard-hearted, far from it, full of pity on the contrary, and with a ready tear to boot. Only my emotional impulses always turn toward me. My feelings of pity concern me. It is not true, after all, that I never loved. I conceived at least one great love in my life, of which I was always the object. The Fall by Albert Camus, 1956. Plight tugged at Zechariah and pointed to his ear. Zechariah noticed and said, "Okay, my friend, do you want me to read out loud?"
Yeah.
Zechariah laughed and said, "Okay." He put the book back and reached for another title that interested him. After paging for a moment, he began to read from a few paragraphs. Here, listen to this from The Picaresque Saint by R.W.B. Lewis. It was written in 1956. There is something not so much a theme as a personality, a representative human figure that seems to me the representative figure of the contemporary novel. It is the figure of a saint, a very peculiar kind of saint, embodying a peculiar sanctity that has provided the title of this book. The figure I am calling the Picaresque Saint tries to hold in balance, as we shall see, by the very contradictions of his character, both the observed truths of contemporary experience and the vital aspiration to transcend them. Paradoxical as he is, the Picaresque Saint is the logical hero of our paradoxical age. The image of the saintly is the image of participation in the sufferings of mankind, as a way of touching and of submitting to what is most real in the world today. At the same time, in what seems to me the most fully developed portraits of the contemporary hero, he is apt to share not only in the miseries of humanity, but in its gravest weaknesses too, and even in its sins. He is not only a saint, as the novelists have been describing him. He is a picaresque saint. Picaresque is an adjective deriving from the word picaro, meaning rogue. Most of these men have a touch of roguery about them, sometimes a touch of criminality. The more roguery, I dare say, the more representative. Zechariah put the volume back and said, "What do you think, Plight?" Plight jumped in the air and seemed to dance around for a moment and said, "Peek." "Peek?" "Peek." Zechariah took another book off the shelf. "Listen to this, Plight." The book is titled Catch-22. Let's see. Written in 1955 by Joseph Heller. Yossarian and the lieutenant's wife are speaking. "I thought you didn't believe in God." "I don't," she sobbed, bursting violently into tears. "But the God I don't believe in is a good God, a just God, a merciful God. He's not the mean and stupid God that you make him out to be." Yossarian laughed and turned her arms loose. "Let's have a little more religious freedom between us," he proposed obligingly. "You don't believe in the God you want to, and I won't believe in the God I want to. Is that a deal?" Plight listened but gave no reaction. Zechariah moved on. "Here's one with a curious title, Too Late, the Phalarope. It was written by Alan Paton in 1953. Let's see how it begins. Let's see. Okay. An unmarried aunt is relaying thoughts about her nephew, a man named Pieter van Vlaanderen. Zechariah read, "Perhaps I could have saved him with only a word, 2 words, out of my mouth. Perhaps I could have saved us all. But I never spoke them. For he spoke hard and bitter words to me, and shut the door of his soul on me, and I withdrew. But I should have hammered on it. I should have broken it down with my naked hands. I should have cried out there, not ceasing, for behind it was a man in danger, the bravest and gentlest of them all. So I who came to save was made a supplicant, and because of the power he had over me, I held, in the strange words of the English, I held my peace. Yet I should have cried out my knowledge to him. It might have saved him. It might have saved us all. Then may the Lord Jesus Christ have mercy upon me, that I held the peace that was no peace at all. He was always 2 men. The one was the soldier of the war, with all the English ribbons that his father hated, the lieutenant in police, hero of thousands of boys and men. The other was the dark and silent man, hiding from all men his secret knowledge of himself, with that hardness and coldness that made men afraid of him, afraid even to speak to him. And I write it all down here, the story of our destruction. And if I write it with fear, then it is not so great a fear, I being myself destroyed. And if I write it down, people may know that he was 2 men, and that one was brave and gentle, and that they may know, when they judge and condemn, that this one struggled with himself in darkness and alone, calling on his God and on the Lord Jesus Christ to have mercy on him." Zechariah closed the book and reshelved it. As he did, he said more to himself than to Plight, "We are all two-faced. Certainly the Almighty God knows this. Part of our struggle is admitting it. But that is only near the beginning of our stories. In the end, may God grant us the strength and the weakness to wrestle with him." Zechariah smiled and walked back in years. He scanned the shelves and wondered if he could be a miner in the library's gems, digging through the many volumes to find the nuggets appealed to him. He and Plight walked for 10 minutes or so, when the young man stopped and retrieved a book from a lower shelf. "This is from a play by Dorothy Sayers. She wrote The Devil to Pay in 1939. Faustus. I dare not say that I am able, yet I say this, that nothing thou canst do shall threat me from the quest of Christ eternal. Yea, though thou stand with thy keen sword made bare, to keep me from him, and have at thy command in ninefold rank the terrible hosts of heaven, yet will I seek him. If I go down to hell, he is there also, or if he stand without, my hands shall batter against hell's brazen gates, till the strong bars burst asunder and let him in. Then will I seize him, then fall down before him, cling to his garments, hold fast by the feet, cry in his ear, I will not let thee go except thou bless me. What do you think, Plight?
"'Kay."
Zechariah continued, Okay, T.S. Eliot's 1935 work, Murder in the Cathedral. Beckett responds to one of the tempters. We do not know very much of the future, except that from generation to generation, the same things happen again and again. Men learn little from others' experience. A slip of paper fell from the pages of the Eliot book. Plight retrieved it and gave it to Zechariah. Let's see what this is. A related quote. No date. It says, There is only one thing more painful than learning from experience, and that is not learning from experience. Evidently that was written by a man named Archibald MacLeish. Plight reacted immediately and with great agitation. He eeped and became anxious. He looked to run somewhere, but didn't seem certain which way to run. He seemed to be acting like there might be someone after him. Easy, Plight. What is it? Was it something I read? Breathing hard and looking in all directions for an unseen enemy, Plight could barely muster a hasty reply saying, Yeah. Was it the author's name? Archibald MacLeish? Plight eeped again and began frantically to move about. Zechariah grabbed him and held him. As he did, he said, Okay, easy, relax. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but no one is after you. No one is going to hurt you. Settle, my friend, settle, okay? Plight gulped out, "'Kay," but he trembled and continued to look around in fear. See, it's all quiet, and no one is here. It was quiet, but someone was there. Both sensed a presence where one of the candle lanterns had been placed. They turned and looked back. Zechariah and Plight saw an approaching shadow emerging from one of the non-fiction to fiction side tunnels. The shadow was a prelude to the man who stepped into their space. Chapter 27, Cavin. The recorder moved north. Cavin waited for him to go out of sight. Then he retrieved the mark and followed his prey into the northern wastelands. Cavin devised a plan, and it involved all three of the hit team. He would utilize the individual assignments of the team members against the others. A mile north, the land was uninhabited. 2 miles out, it was a rocky landscape dotted with the skeletons of lizards and vultures. Cavin was familiar with the area, and he moved to the northwest to get in front of the third man. There was a narrow gully etched in the sun-baked rock. The steep banks took time and focus in order to negotiate a safe crossing of that area. Cavin went down a spot with a natural descent. This is where the third man would have to come if he wanted to continue. This is where Cavin would snare him. He snugged himself behind a crevice that afforded him concealment and shade. From this position, he would not see the third man approach. While he had a modest stash of supplies not too far away, he figured he didn't have time to retrieve it. He'd do that later. Cavin waited and listened. He ran through the main plan and anticipated what he would do in various scenarios that might become necessary. The recorder stopped at the top of the ravine. Cavin heard his approach. The third man studied the landscape in all directions. He was searching for a spot to descend while scoping out the horizon for friend and foe. Satisfied with his recon, he began a slow, careful descent to the floor of the gully. With his pack slung over his back, he used his hands and feet as he scooted down. While he did not see Cavin, he sensed his presence behind him. It was too late. Cavin struck him from behind with a weighted leather sap. He removed the man's pack and dropped it to the ground. Cavin directed and shoved the stunned man down the ravine. The third man stumbled and tried to clear his mind. Cavin was conducting an experiment as he forced the man to walk. It was a trial-and-error process of sapping the man to keep him befuddled, and yet not so hard as to keep him from being able to walk. Cavin liked this, although he found it difficult to restrain himself. He did so by savoring the pain and anticipating the upcoming taking of the man's life. Less than an hour later, Cavin guided his captive to the edge of a waterless cistern. Cavin pushed him over the edge. The man screamed as he fell the 10 feet. The recorder landed awkwardly and cried out in pain. He'd broken his lower leg. "Did you break your leg?" The man said nothing. "Okay, stay silent for now. I'll give you some time to think about it. I'm going to go back and get your pack. Don't go anywhere. Actually, I take that back. Go ahead and leave if you want." With that mocking, Cavin left. He retrieved the pack and returned. The third man was still in the cistern. He was on his side and continued to grab his leg. "So, let's try this again. Did you break your leg?" There was no reply. "You are most uncooperative, or maybe you are just not a friendly guy. Is that it? Wait, maybe you are Hashashasim. Is that it? Well, let's see. We're just going to have to find out, aren't we? What is in this pack of yours?" "Oh, nice, a canteen full of water. I can use that. It extends my range and time considerably. What else?" "A notebook. What is that all about?" "I've tagged you as the recorder of the 3-man kill team. Is that what you are? Are you a recorder and a reporter? Who do you report to? The doctor? Tell me what you know about him." The injured man said nothing. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you a very basic question. You need to answer it. Actually, you will answer it. Here it is. Do you want to live?" There was no reply. Cavin picked up a rock and casually dropped it into the cistern. It hit the ground close by the third man. He scooted away from it and shrieked from the pain in his leg. "I'm going to continue dropping rocks down to you. Now, if you don't want to live, then just let them strike you. But if you do want to live, then keep avoiding the rocks as I drop them. In time, this big hole will fill with rocks, and you can rise with the rocks until you are up here. So, I'm not going to ask you the question with my mouth. Every time I drop a rock, that is the same as asking you the question. So, here we go. Let's begin the questioning. Here comes my first question." With the man watching, Cavin selected a medium-sized rock and examined it. Then he dropped it. The man moved sideways and screamed in pain as he did. The third rock bounced sideways off another rock and hit the man in the hip. Cavin said, "Look at the time. I must hurry, for I have other things to do." With that, he began casting rocks into the hole, one after the other. The man could not avoid them. "Stop! Stop! No more! Yes, I want to live." "All right. Now that's progress. But let's make sure we know the situation. You are in a dry pit with a broken leg. You can't get out by yourself. You need me to help you. In order for you to live, I must live. It's up to you to keep me alive. Understand?" "No." "There are 2 others in your group." Cavin said this by way of a known fact. He watched to see any tell the man might give, indicating that this was not true. He saw nothing. "The rest of your group is ahead of you, right? To the north, along the edge of the sand dune, right?" The man replied, "Yes, but how am I able to keep you alive?" "By doing exactly what you have just done, by answering my questions so that I'm completely and fully briefed on your group, your mission, and your individual assignments. If I ask you a question and detect a hint of a lie in your answer, or any deception in your mannerisms, I will leave and you will die. Do you understand?" "Yes." "If you got up here and had the opportunity, would you kill me?" The man hesitated and then firmly said, "Yes." "Good. Now you see, that's an honest answer. So, do you want to live?" "Yes." "All right. I'm going to kill the other 2. After I do, I'll return and rescue you. So your focus right now is to give me all the information I need in order to eliminate the other two and get back to you here. Do you understand? Yes. During the next 2 hours, the man was interrogated. He answered questions about their group mission, the assignments of each member, tactics, weapons, and supplies. He also asked about the demeanor, personality, and tendencies of the other two. Finally, he asked about the council, and particularly about the doctor. He received as much information as he deemed was available from his prisoner. Cavin was satisfied with what he'd been told, and he grinned as he left. Cavin had much to grin about, for the third man was a wealth of information. "I'll be back in a day or two." "I need water." "Yes, you do." The recorder yelled, "Don't forget me." Cavin replied, "I won't." In Chapter 28, Gene. Zechariah moved forward to put himself between Plight and the man who stepped from a side tunnel. The man noticed what the young man did. Plight relaxed, but Zechariah didn't notice. The man was lean and muscular. He comported himself with determined confidence and gave no impression that he would be someone to test. The man commanded, "Stand down, young man. You must be Zechariah." "I am. Who are you?"
Gee,
said Plight. "I am Gene, Sergeant of the Ladies' Guard." Zechariah exhaled and said, "That is a relief. The way Plight was acting just now, I wasn't sure who you might be." He spoke on, saying, "Yes, I'm Zechariah. Obviously you've heard that I'm here." "Obviously," replied Gene in a short manner. "What do you do as the Sergeant of the Ladies' Guard?" "I follow orders." "I see." Gene directed his attention to Plight. "We have been ordered to make another supply run. Let's get ready, now."
"'Kay."
"Wait," Zechariah said urgently. "Should I go too?" "No, you stay. Plight goes with me."
"'Kay."
"But am I supposed to stay here?" "Follow your orders. Do what you're told. It may be that this tunnel rat will return to you when he has finished his work at the secret entrance to the tunnels." Zechariah was startled and asked, "Tunnel rat? That seems to be quite derogatory." Gene stared at Zechariah and then responded, "It's a way I describe what he does and who he is. Do you prefer something more sanitary like corridor crab? He listens, he follows orders, I cut him no slack." Zechariah responded, "Well, I'd expect something nicer." "Nicer? Nice has nothing to do with it. I am interested in duty, valor, honor, loyalty, obedience, and service. Nice is not a priority for me. This is as nice as I get. So get ready to move out, Plight."
"'Kay."
"You need to make a supply run."
"'Kay."
"You also have to collect the courier reports and bring them to the lady."
"'Kay."
"Quit saying K."
"'Kay."
"Tunnel rat."
"Yeah."
With that, the two left Zechariah and the library. Compiler's note. Gene was an athletic boy and enjoyed being involved in endurance tests. He was above average in intelligence, but was only interested in history, particularly military history. He joined the armed service at an early age and served 4 tours of duty on the southern border. Gene routinely went on patrols that penetrated into Sandman-controlled territory. He earned the respect and trust of his peers and his superiors. He progressed in rank in the minimum amounts of time in grade and was awarded many commendations and medals. It is not clear why, but he refused to enter the academy for officers. Gene received orders to report to the lady in the tunnels, where he was posted as the sergeant of the guard. This was a different duty for him, and it can be said with some assurance of veracity that he missed the open field fighting. Defensive guarding seemed too passive for him. Gene transitioned the guard from a post and pace activity to one where intelligence was being gathered. He assigned certain men and women to be the eyes and ears in the city, and especially in the tunnels. He wanted to protect the lady from spies and moles that might worm their way into the tunnels. As such, he kept an especially close eye on those who recently came into the tunnels. He was curt, quiet, cautious, and skeptical. Jean would provoke someone and observe the reaction, sorting out whether the reaction was because of the person's nature, vocation, personality, or political leanings. He was particularly seeking an inclination toward political correctness. This is what he was doing with Zechariah in the library. He had done the same thing to Plight, but he had a more difficult time getting a fix on him. Plight could not carry on an extended conversation with Jean, and the military man had a difficult time making observations based on facial and or body reactions. This made him skeptical of Plight, so he pushed him harder than anyone else. Also, it seems that Jean simply had a personality problem with Plight. Maybe it was because Plight never became angry, didn't challenge anyone, and had a certain naivete that rankled Jean. So Jean pushed Plight and spoke harshly to the tunnel rat. "My mission tonight is to oversee a routine run that we've been doing several times a month. Your assignment is the same as the times before. Got it?"
K.
Stop saying K.
K.
I think you're an idiot. Are you an idiot, Pite?
Nah.
I've got a mission and you've got an assignment. Let's get on with them.
K.
Jean used mission for what he did because he was a member of the armed forces. He used assignment for what needed to be done by those who were civilians. As they walked through the high tunnels and in the direction of the city, Jean continued the briefing. "We have a 4-hour time limit to get the supplies moved into the tunnel and placed in the distribution system. While you're doing that, I'll be checking the early detection system to make sure it has not been tampered with and test it for operational readiness. After the supplies are secure, your assignment is to retrieve the intelligence report. Caution, stealth, and silence are the means to a successful completion of this part of your assignment. Are you good to go?" Jean thought about how Plight was going to answer his impending question. He didn't want another K from Plight. He wasn't entirely certain whether Plight might be mocking him on occasion, or at least playing with him. "Do you have any questions about your assigned duties?"
Nah.
The mission was accomplished, and the assignments were completed without incident. On the way back to the main rooms, Jean checked the detection system in the low tunnels. When they got to the higher tunnels, Plight checked the lighting and made certain that there were extra candles for the lanterns in the rooms. When they arrived at the entrance of the library, Plight stopped and waited. Jean kept going, glad to be leaving Plight's presence. He didn't see the salute that Plight gave him. Compiler's note. It is uncertain whether or not this was a mocking gesture or a sincere act. Knowing the general naivete of Plight, we opt for the latter. However, also aware of his intelligence, we do not rule out the former. Either way, the report of his salute causes us to smile. Plight entered the library and found Zechariah at the 1884 fiction shelf. The young man was examining With Fire and Sword by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Zechariah looked up and saw Plight approaching him. "Hi, Plight. You all done?"
Yeah.
"What have you got there?" Plight gave him a flask of water and some food. "Oh, thank you. I'm really thirsty and getting hungry. I seem to have a problem getting into tunnels and not having water."
Yeah.
After drinking from the flask, and before taking a bite of his food, Zechariah asked, "What else have you got there?" Plight handed him a book. "The Horse and His Boy" by C.S. Lewis. "Do you want me to read this to you?" Plight nodded his head in the affirmative and hunched himself on the floor. He looked uncomfortable, but was not. "You sure you want me to read this particular book to you?"
Yeah.
Chapter 29, Cavin. The next part of his plan would be the most difficult for Cavin. He had taken into consideration the reality that he was not going to be able to defeat the killer in any fight whatsoever. The man or woman was a trained and proficient killer, a member of the Hashasasim. Up close and personal meant death for Cavin. He would have to utilize his advantages. Cavin's plan focused on the fact that the killer had no weaknesses. Yet the assassin did have several disadvantages, which were Cavin's advantages. The first advantage that Cavin had was that he knew the area, including the rare spots where water might be available. The best source of water was halfway down a 20-foot cliff. A narrow cleft led back to a spot where water would dribble. Another place was at the head of a ravine. Cavin had discovered this damp ground and piled rocks upon it. This protected and hid the location. There were no guarantees that water would be in either of these locations, for the drought had been severe. The scattered skeletons on the dry landscape bore witness to that reality. Near these two water sources, Cavin had built and concealed modest supply stashes. He could rehydrate and resupply himself in these places. The killer only had what was on his person. This gave Cavin the advantage of time. He could survive longer if it came down to a waiting game. This became a part of Cavin's plan. Also working in the psychopath's favor was what he knew. The killer was likely unaware that Cavin knew so much about him and the others. Cavin knew that there were 3 people in the kill team. He was aware of their plan and tactic in carrying out their mission. Certainly the member of the Hashasasim did not know of the capture, imprisonment, and interrogation of the 3rd man. All of this and more was woven into Cavin's plan. Cavin moved to the west until he came to a ravine. He intended to arrive at a position that would be between the killer and the lamb, but to do so unseen. This required him to go west, and then north, and finally east. He followed the ravine, which ran in a northerly and slightly eastern direction. Periodically he would climb to the top of the ravine and carefully peer to the east. He figured he'd be able to see the first man since he was the bait. He didn't anticipate being able to spot the assassin. The first man wanted to be seen. The second man did not. This made Cavin unsure about the distance between the lamb and the killer. He figured that he must locate the lamb and continue on north a quarter mile or so. Then he'd move to the east and wait for the bait to come to him. After a couple hours of traveling north and occasionally peering east, Cavin saw someone. It was the first man. To the west, the sun was within an hour of setting. Cavin drank from his canteen and looked where the killer might be. He did not see him, nor did he expect to be able to do so. Cavin moved out quickly to the north, and did so using the landscape and setting sun as an aid to remain unseen. At a suitable place, he quickly headed east, and was soon in a position behind a split outcropping of rock that the sand dune was in the slow process of burying. He wedged in as tightly as possible. His heart was pounding as he tried to remain still. He wondered if the lamb would be able to hear his breathing. Cavin forced himself to breathe slowly and quietly. It was painful. His body was screaming for oxygen. He disciplined himself. The sun was nearing the horizon when a man walked by him. Cavin had not heard him approach. It was only from years of practice at his father's house and hiding in the city that kept him from jerking in surprise or emitting a sound. Cavin thought this might be the killer, but quickly understood it was not. This was the bait. The bait continued walking. Cavin had a piercing suspicion that the lamb knew he was there. Cavin realized, a sensing from the lamb, that he knew of someone's presence. However, the lamb gave no physical indication of this. He continued his alluring walk. Cavin had to act quickly. He looked to the west. The sun nearing the horizon, it would soon set. Cavin took the marker and placed it on the south side of the rock outcropping. Then he quickly moved in the direction of the first man. He saw the first man and took a position where he could keep him in sight and still be able to see the rock where the marker was. He waited. Cavin was convinced that the lamb knew he was behind him. After only 10 minutes or so, Cavin suddenly saw the killer. He came quietly to the rock and saw the marker. He appeared to be slightly confused. He looked ahead and then to the west. He shaded his eyes as he did so. Cavin silently petitioned the killer. "Go! Go! Do it! Please! Go inspect that area to the west that you think is a camp. I know the sun is in your eyes. It is unclear. You are going to have to go there. Do it now. The marker is your master. Go!" The killer placed his pack in the crevasse of the rock and moved to the west. Cavin silently thanked the killer. "Yes, well done, and thank you for the gift. That was truly unexpected." After the killer was out of sight, Cavin retrieved the man's pack and started in the direction of the lamb. It would take the killer at least an hour to get to the location and some time to inspect the area. By that time it would be dark. Cavin wasn't sure how long it would take the second man to realize he'd been deceived, but he was certain that it would take many hours until he returned to retrieve his pack and continue. Navigating away in the dark would be time-consuming and taxing. Perhaps he might not be able to get back until just before dawn. Cavin smiled, took a drink of water, and turned in the direction of the lamb. The third man kept moving north. He knew he was the bait and walked with the purpose of being seen. Cavin began to close the distance on him. They also had an hour before dark, and at a walking pace they would be 3 miles in that time. The ground adjacent to the dune was sandy. It was not nearly so difficult to negotiate as the area where the killer was. The lamb sensed Cavin closing in on him. He began to check behind him more often. He was not only looking for Cavin, but also trying to see his teammate. Cavin now wanted to be seen. After a half hour, the lamb did see him. He feigned fear and kept going north. The next time the bait stopped to look back, he took a drink of water. He was looking for the killer. He didn't see him. Cavin imagined that the bait had the first pangs of panic as a result. This thought thrilled Cavin. He moved in quickly and confronted his prey. "You've been following me," said the first man. He was not asking, he was declaring. As he did, his eyes surveyed the area behind Cavin. He tried to cover this by giving the impression that he was deep in thought and was merely looking at nothing. "I have." "It's dry here, and the walking is wearisome. I've got some water here, if you'd like a drink." The lamb retrieved the canteen from his pack. He offered it to Cavin. He took it. Cavin responded, "Thank you for the water. I don't need a drink right now, but I'll just keep the canteen so I can have a drink a little bit later." That's the only canteen I have. I'll be needing it back." "No, I don't think you will. You know, you're right. It is a dry land, and dangerous." "Dangerous? Yes, it is. Do you mean to harm me?" "No, I mean to kill you. Actually, I'm going to kill you." The first man was seized with fright. He looked for the second man. He panicked and screamed for help. Then the lamb turned and ran. Cavin followed him at a walking pace. The more distance north they went, the better. Cavin was excited at the chase. The man's fear for his life, and especially the despair at the failure of his partner to appear, caused the adrenaline to flow in Cavin's blood. The screams for help added to Cavin's bloodlust. The lamb fell. He was breathing hard when Cavin killed him with a short length of rope. His body was placed at the edge of a wind-swept sand dune. Cavin slid just enough sand down to cover the body. He consolidated the packs and smiled at the fact that he had all the food and water from the 3-man team. Cavin spent the night about 200 meters to the northwest in a hidden spot. He ate some food and washed it down with water. He slept until just before dawn. Then he took up a vantage point and waited. A couple hours later, he saw the killer moving steadily north. The man made no attempt to conceal himself. This second man understood he'd been tricked. A member of the great Hashasasim had been led astray. What shame! When he returned to the area where he hid his pack, he discovered it was gone. There was also no sign of the recorder. What dishonor! Now the assassin was running to catch up to his target as well as the first man in his kill team. He breathed heavily and his head was down. Cavin smiled. He picked up his gear and began following the killer. He kept him in sight and noted that the second man did not check behind him. Very sloppy. The dehydration was having its effect. The assassin moved past the spot where his comrade had been buried. The assassin didn't notice the burial spot where the sand was slightly different from the surrounding area. He was truly inattentive. Cavin wondered if this was due to his intense focus, or to his increasing dehydration, or both. Cavin smiled. At midday, the killer stopped and hung his head. He was now suffering from heat exhaustion. Cavin saw the doubt as the man cast his eyes to the north. What was he thinking? They could not have gone so far north as this. I need water from my comrade who is ahead of me, or from the target who took my pack. Are they ahead of me, or behind me? I'm getting disoriented, and I can't think clearly. Cavin stood in the open and let the killer see him. They were 100 meters apart. He noted that the man did not immediately come for him. The second man just stared at Cavin, who was now drinking from one of the canteens. Cavin waved at him and started walking south. The man began to jog but stumbled. Cavin started to jog but stopped when he saw the man fall. He was clearly now taunting the professional killer. An hour passed with neither of the men moving. Cavin sipped water. The man was no longer sweating. Heat stroke was setting in. A couple hours later, Cavin began walking in the direction of the man. The killer saw him and tried to stand. He did so, but was unsteady. Cavin was wary. The man might have a dagger or a throwing star. He came within 30 meters of him and sat down. The man gave no indication that he was able to walk, let alone engage in any sort of attack. Cavin waited. An hour before sunset, he carefully approached the man. He had not moved. Using his foot, Cavin poked him in the back. The man emitted a soft groan. Cavin rolled him over and met no resistance. The assassin's lips were cracked, parched, and split. He moaned, "Ha, ha, ha, see." Cavin uttered a mocking reply, "Ha, ha, see." Then he strangled the man and thought that it was all too easy. He sat near the body. He ate some food and drank some water. It would be a long walk back, but that would be tomorrow. After taking the hood and the clothes of the Hashashasim man, he covered the body in sand. Cavin went to sleep with one word on his mind: payback. Payback is what had just happened. Payback is what was ahead. Cavin checked the pit as he walked south to the city. The recorder was most inconsiderate. He had succumbed. Chapter 30, Zechariah. Zechariah sat beside Plight and looked at the book. It was an interesting title that held the promise of emphasizing perspective. A horse owned a boy. Zechariah read the book in a few hours. Upon completing The Horse and His Boy, he looked at Plight and said, "This is a very interesting book, very thought-provoking."
Yeah.
It is almost as if Lewis were writing about our situation today with the Sandmen. You noticed the similarities between the Sandmen and the Kellermen, didn't you?
Yeah.
The Kellermen had beards and wore turbans and long robes just like the Sandmen today. The Kellermen, or Heat Men, were from the hot desert and wielded scimitars in battle. Their currency was the crescent. And then there are the names and titles: Viziers, Tarkan, Arshish. The members of their royalty were carried about on curtain litters, bore by slaves. The use of certain names or titles were like that of a god, like the Tisroc, with the accompanying "May he live forever" invoked immediately. Then there is Tash, an Iranian word used for the irresistible evil god of the Kellermen. The two sat in silence, each with his own thoughts. This book was certainly more than a children's story. At first, Zechariah mulled over the possibility that it was a prophetic writing. He put that idea aside as another idea began forming. "Plight, do you think that this book is telling an historical account that took place long ago and is likely to occur again?"
Yeah.
So Prince Rabadash led the men of the Calormene across the sandy desert to attack the Narnians. He conquers along the way and begins an assault on Anvard. While the invaders take a battering ram to the gate of the city, it is here that they are defeated, at the gates of Vienna.
Yeah.
Plight took the book from Zechariah, who remained deep in thought. Plight's gnarled and calloused fingers clumsily turned pages near the end of the book. He recalled a certain page when Zechariah was reading the book. Finally, Plight found what he was looking for and extended a twisted finger to one part. Zechariah's musing was interrupted as he looked at the paragraph. Finally, he said, "This is what the captured Prince Rabadash says to those who held him prisoner." Zechariah read aloud, "Not one of you dare touch a hair of my head. Every insult you have heaped on me shall be paid with oceans of Narnian and Archenlandish blood. Terrible shall the vengeance of the Tisroc be even now. But kill me, and the burning and torturings in these northern lands shall become a tale to frighten the world 1,000 years hence. Beware, beware, beware." He commented, 1,000 years hence? How long has it been since Vienna? Prophetic? Plight turned a couple pages back from this and pointed to another part. He waited for it to be read. Zechariah did so. "A fig for the Tisroc," said King Loon. "His strength is in numbers, and numbers will never cross the desert."
Yeah.
King Loon was correct in his statement, but not in his dismissal. The Sandmen aren't able to amass an army to overpower us. Over the centuries they have learned this the hard way. But that doesn't mean that they are not engaging in efforts to defeat us. They are infiltrating our legal and educational disciplines. Spies and moles are among us. Acts of terror and violence are taking place. Indeed, the Calormen have learned and are adapting to what will work. I really think we ought to be doing the same.
Yeah.
Something occurred to Zechariah. He aimed a cunning smile in the direction of Plight and said, "I thought you couldn't read. You know how to read, don't you?"
Yeah.
"Who taught you?" "Peek." "But you're only able to read to yourself, and you enjoy it when someone reads out loud with you?"
Yeah.
"So are you able to write?"
Nah. Yeah. Nah. Yeah.
Zechariah laughed and was about to ask him which it was. He didn't ask Plight about that, but rather said, "So, while your hands are in such a condition that you're not physically capable of writing, you're able to write in your mind? Is that the way it is with you?"
Yeah.
Zechariah looked at Plight in amazement, awe, and gratitude.